Good morning and welcome to the September 11th, 2007 special meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have roll call, please?
Council members Draymond.
Here.
Quintero. Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. Mr. Starbird.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the Council. Thank you again for taking the time this morning to work through the various projects in the capital improvement program. We are going to pick up where we left off at the last study session, which is at library projects.
What page, please?
Actually, it's page 10 of 13 on the list that was distributed last week. We have a new list, but I think it's the same. I want to note that you have made a decision on new Northwest Glendale Branch Library, so we will not be revisiting that, but we'll take up with the discussion of the full branch library, Adams Square or Garfield campus. I want to note, Mr. Mayor, that we're starting about 40 minutes later than we did last week, so we're not sure how far we'll get through. We're anticipating we will complete the list. I think under any circumstance we'll complete the review of the list. I would like, before we break, to review the process and structure for beginning to make priority decisions about the projects, which we anticipate getting to next week. So, Yasmin, if you can be ready toward the end of the meeting to take us through the process that we've given some thought to, and believe me, it's very simple. It's not much more than a blank sheet of paper with the projects listed to begin in sort of an iterative fashion working through priority setting. With that, let's turn to the libraries. Cindy?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of Council. My name is Cindy Cleary, and I'm the Assistant Director of Libraries. And we have a couple things on the list of library items. The first one is a full branch library proposal at the Adams Square or Garfield campus, or related to the Adams Square or the Garfield campus. As you know, the storefront library is in the midst of construction and anticipated to open in the beginning of 2008. The new, there are no slides related to this either. The new 2,200 square foot library is a wonderful addition of library services to an area that has been without. But this is considered a temporary solution until we can build a full-scale 17,000, what is anticipated or proposed to be a 17,000 square foot library. We are currently in the second year of a 10-year lease at the storefront library. We have the possibility of a joint use project at the Garfield campus of GCC, but at last word, this project wasn't going to happen for at least, or begin happening for at least 7 or 8 years. When we got to the point of thinking about a full-scale library, and if we were to share resources with GCC in a joint use project and that did not require the purchase of land, we would anticipate the cost to be about $12 million. If a joint use project was not feasible and we did need to purchase land in the southeast sector, then the cost would rise to about $17 million. And this is based on 2003 dollars and an assessment that was completed by Civic Technologies.
Is there a picture? Was that graphic not?
No,
I don't have a graphic related to this.
Oh,
Near the storefront library or Garfield campus.
Could you just repeat again? This is the Garfield
campus,
of
which
the
is
GCC,
which is on Chevy Chase.
And does that anticipate? I was just trying to. I spaced for a little bit there. Are we looking at the property where the current medical facility is, the urgent care?
Well, that was the original concept when we were first approached several years ago by the college. They had at that time a relationship with the Doctors Davidian, who owned the large office building that had been sold to them by the Adventist Hospital. And there were some plans then for development of the office building, probably structured parking, consolidation and acquisition of property on the south side of Garfield, east or west of Chevy Chase, by the college for expansion of its campus. And in that campus setting, between the office building, which would, I think, continue to have a medical character to it, and the college plans for expansion and development of its southerly campus, in there somewhere would be a library. likely a joint use between the college and the city. At the time, our projection was great concept, we're interested, but we don't see it happening in the next 10 years or so, just based on the city's priorities and other needs and the amount of money that would need to be committed. But that we wanted to be engaged with them and continue to have a seat at the table. I think at that time, 3 years ago, they had much more optimistic estimates of how soon they would be moving. In the meantime, a lot of that broad concept, I think, has run into difficulty, especially with the Doctors Davidian and the use of that building, although the college has proceeded to purchase and assemble land for development of their southerly campus. That's why you see on our sheet, we note that this project is probably somewhere beyond the current 10-year picture, out there somewhere on the horizon, but not within the 10-year view that we have here. So we really haven't anticipated this trying to be fit within this current 10-year picture.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Weaver?
I'm trying to see what kind of envisioning the parties are talking about. Are you talking about a one-story rectangular-type building sitting there for library? You said joint use. On a one-story structure, or?
I don't think, our visioning hasn't gone that far.
Yeah, I don't think we've gone that far.
No, this is just very, very broad conceptual, with essentially being driven by the college, saying that they'd like to expand and develop a long-term, more of a campus at that location. And they saw a role, and frankly, we think it would be a good opportunity at some point to look at a joint-use library, whether it's single-story, 2 stories, how it would mesh with the rest of their facilities. We haven't gone that far.
Well, where I was going, I'm trying to understand. If you're talking the assemblage of the land, and depending on if buildings are coming down to put up, and one has to happen before the other in terms of the medical has to move out before you can take that building down if that's where it's going to go, and it's all college-owned land, correct?
Well, no, the office building is privately owned.
And it still hasn't been purchased?
No. The original plan was the doctors who own the building would participate with the college. So they wouldn't sell the building and the building wouldn't be torn down. It would become part of this greater campus, and the medical uses expanded at the office building, the possibility of utilizing the privately owned surface parking to the west of the office building for a structured parking that could serve both the office building and the GCC campus there.
And where would the library go in relation
We don't know.
to that?
Somewhere in that whole mix would be a library.
Because I'm getting at, if they own the land, and if you want to talk about a 2-story building minimum with a library on the first floor and schoolrooms on a second and third floor, maybe it doesn't have to wait 8 to 10 years. If we decide the financing was there to do it, the college has acquired land if it's going to go there, and we budget the money, could we build out the structure? I assume it's the financial end of it they're concerned about, but I think it's going to have to be a dual use. If we have the square footage, a 15,000 square foot library? And you can put a number of classrooms above that if that's what they're looking at.
Yeah, I think the problem is we're not looking at anything except this very broad concept of somewhere in the long term in this campus,
Okay, then,
a library.
In essence, what you're telling us, not in the next 10 years, so it's about as low a priority as...
As libraries go, in terms of the library's needs, this is the lowest priority.
Yeah, I think this line was put in here just as a reminder that eventually we're going to have to look beyond our 2,200 square foot
So when the
library.
lease expires on the current interim site, we will be probably renewing the lease.
Yeah, it's a 5-year renewable lease for another 5 years, and we're 2 years into the
And we're
first
probably talking
5.
10 to 15 years, that new site.
Probably. Again, a lot of it depends on the college. I mean, they have continued to acquire land. I don't know if we've had recent meetings to see what their
No, we
development
haven't.
plans
No,
are for that area
All I know is what I read in the paper, so I was
That's all
trying to
we know.
pick brains to find out.
at this point.
I mean, the only thing we may need within the 10-year cycle is if they do engage us in more serious conversation, probably some planning.
Maybe some planning
funding,
money, but we can,
Yeah,
again, this
okay.
is one of the items as we
Pulling
get
up.
into the CIP next year, the following year, and we have a little more
It's so far out.
solidness on this concept.
Since
and
we're going to
maybe some planning
prioritize, I
money.
know where to put this priority.
And And Mr. Starbird, as we talk about this location, I know there has been some interest expressed to me for the city closing Garfield and making that a park of some sort. I don't know if that concept should be included in this joint library.
And frankly, again, we haven't had recent discussions with the college. The last meeting we had, we suggested that we should do the environmental review on the potential of the street closure. But again, and I'm not exactly certain where the doctors are who own the building, where they are in their relationship with the college. All of this street closure discussion was based on, I think, the previous concept of this grand campus that would include the private medical offices as well as the campus expansion. And I don't know where that is currently, frankly.
Yeah, I don't either.
Steve, you must have more feedback.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Starbird, the college is wanting to proceed with the development of the southern campus, so not including the doctor's property, including the closure of Garfield. They still want to do that as an entrance from the west into the facility. So they've already they've hired an environmental firm.
Okay.
To start the
beginning environmental
EIR
review.
process.
We've indicated to the college that the key is going to be the reaction from the neighborhood from a purely engineering standpoint, traffic standpoint. At least first blush, we thought, well, Garfield could conceivably be closed from an access standpoint.
Right.
But as we advise the college, it really depends on the reaction from the neighborhood in the area. And so we suggest, you should really start doing, if you're serious about it, you should start doing your environmental review so we can get all the information gathered, and then you should plan on some community outreach to see the reaction from the neighborhood.
And they are moving in that direction.
Mr. Sefian.
Question, is there sewer lines going underneath Garfield?
We have to, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, and that's one of the things we've told them. You have to look at all of the substructure utilities that go through there, including those that aren't ours, gas, telephone, and et cetera, and talk about how we're going to relocate those, whether we're going to have an easement situation that could drive what it is they ultimately build on that street. As was mentioned, there was a desire to have sort of a parkway setting or a park-type setting.
The other issue is they've bought, I think, a couple of units. They haven't bought all the way to the end of the block. There are some apartments that are, and they have access through Garfield, so that's going to be an issue that they need to deal with. I don't see much of a problem if they owned all of the block. But I think if you own part of the block, then it creates a problem for the units on the end, because they have access through Garfield. So that's...
Right. All of those things are going to be very critical in how they've acquired some properties. Mr. Starbird indicated they're in negotiations to acquire more, and I think their goal is to assemble that entire land site where their facilities are, plus all the way south.
Do we have any contacts with the property owners on 701, or I think 801, something like that, on Chevy Chase?
Not that I recall, but that doesn't mean we don't.
The Davidians, we're not talking to them.
We very early on.
Right.
In fact, we were in meetings with Davidians and the college.
Recently. I'm talking about recently.
Not the city, and I don't know where GCC stands in their discussion.
Mr. Weaver?
I hope everybody realizes that there will be objections from the public on the environmental document. There is nothing you can do in this city, or any city, that does not does not raise concerns from the public. So you're going to have that. That's given. Shouldn't be a stopper, but it should be a
And we have tried to sensitize the college to that. I mean, at the times when we have presumed a neighborhood would be okay with street closure, we have often been surprised.
Yeah, and you will be.
And that also means neighborhoods that the street isn't being closed, they'll have concerns about what happens to traffic being rerouted. So we've advised the college, we've been through that before. You've got to have a lot of contact in the neighborhood, a lot of public input early on in the process. And
we have,
they seem to be following that route.
We've even suggested that during the environmental evaluation process that we temporarily close the street to see exactly what the ramifications are, where the traffic goes.
Good idea.
Instead of just assuming based on flows and traffic counts, what happens when you actually close it, where do they go? So that's something that we're working with them on to include in the review.
Like you, we...
Either to Windsor or Acacia, one or the other.
Right.
Or would they completely go a different route? Would they not even want to try that area? So
Well, I think there's one thing that, I mean, my parents live on Acacia, and I've lived there for a while in the past, and I will tell you, with all those apartments that are in that area were built in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, which do not have ample parking, what happens during the night, a lot of people who live on Acacia and they live on Windsor, they will park on Garfield because there is no other place to park. So they would park in Garfield and they literally walk 3 blocks to their units. I think that is going to be one issue that's going to affect them more than anything else, is the issue of loss of parking. So that may be one thing that they could do to mitigate some of that issue with the neighborhood as large.
And Mr. Yusefian, that's exactly what we've discussed with them. Not only that the neighborhood on the east side, or excuse me, the west side, but as you recall, there's been some parking concerns with the church on the east side,
Right.
with I believe that Balboa School on the east side as well. So we've encouraged them to try to provide parking that would also allow the residents and the other folks to use it when it's not being used by the students.
Right.
Suggestions on our part to them.
Very, very early on, there were discussions of a parking district being formed. You have commercial properties, you have private properties, and then frankly, at least our view is the city can't always be looked to solve these problems for all of the properties, from the schools to the churches to the commercial uses to the multifamily residential that do not have adequate parking. The possibility even of creating a parking district where there'd be assessments and contributions to support, whether it's through structured parking or surface parking. But again, that was all in the context of a much grander project for which they had the cooperation of the owners of the big medical building. My sense is that's gone a little off-center now. We clearly need a meeting with the college, get an update on where they are, because we know what you know, and that's generally what we read in the newspaper. So this item needs to be updated at some point in time.
We'll do that.
Thank you, Steve.
But for now, we don't see a need to, except maybe somewhere out in the later years for some planning money, but for now, no need to think of this on a need to allocate resources.
Okay. Thank you.
The next line is Central Park Phase 2 and library entrance orientation, and 2 of those items are directly related to the library. Ron, can you help me out and get me to the 5th slide, I think is the right one. The 2 items that I'm going to discuss related to the Central Library, first one is to relocate the HVAC systems that are currently housed in a small building adjacent to the library in order to accommodate a proposed, actually that's the wrong slide. This
Point
is
that
not
out.
in order.
Ron,
Sorry.
can we point that
Number
out with the
5.
cursor where
Not the
that where
5th
that
one,
building
sorry.
sits?
The 5th one.
Just a little.
Yeah,
The
that's
HVAC
it.
unit is right where the,
It's
on
right
the
where
path
the
of travel.
hatched lines go through.
Right there.
Right there.
That's
right.
the one.
That's it.
The proposal is for New Street to come through, over across Brand, through what is now the Rite Aid and the Carpet store, and a pedestrian pass-through into the library property to have visual access to Central Park and the ARC and the library. Before I go on with that, let me just say what the second request is. The second request is to reorient our entrance to the south side of the building and possibly the north side of the building to better serve the incoming development, both on the north, Maryland, the proposed hotel coming in, the Armenian Society to the north, the proposed or the new ARC that's coming in on our south. So we are proposing a reorientation of our entrances to the north and or the south side of the building. Back to the pass-through of New Street, if you could go to the next slide, Ron, thank you. The proposed pass-through currently looks into this area, and the
And
building...
that's the building.
Yeah, the building
That's the air
that we would
conditioning building.
propose taking down
So
would
this
be
is
that...
standing in the parking lot in the alley.
Right.
To the east of the buildings at front on Brand,
Right.
looking toward what the passageway from Brand would eventually dead end into if the passageway were put in.
Right.
So, and the idea of New Street is to get, like I said before, visual access to green space and the park, the availability of the park and the library and the ARC. So, in order to the proposal on the table at the moment is to relocate this to an underground location on the northwest corner of the library, and the cost of that is estimated at $850,000.
Could you go back on the first slide? Show me where you're going to put it.
But
Where is it going to go? Northwest corner.
actually, they're also
Northeast, you said?
If you backtrack.
Did you say northeast corner or northwest corner?
The proposal for the new location would be in the northwest corner of the library.
Okay, go back
So-
to that again.
So
Yeah.
up north of loading
So
dock area.
right in
Northwest,
that
so it's going to
area.
be right there?
Right. And there's a possibility for an underground HVAC system, which is a little more expensive, but it would be less obtrusive than putting it above
So you're going to
ground.
put grids on top to basically vent the heat up?
Right.
Okay.
Why are you making a jog on the road south of the library?
I'm sorry?
Why are you making a jog in the pass-through beneath the library, south of the library?
Right here.
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
Talking about
Because
the
of the
jog.
parking?
Yeah.
The dog
Yeah.
leg.
Why don't you go just straight if you're taking that building
You
out?
could go straight and make angle parking in.
Yeah, I think that's presuming that the parking remains, but of course, very long-term, with the development of parking to the southwest, the intent would be to eliminate the parking and have the library directly connected to the park. So I think what they've done there just diagrammatically is to
I know,
show
you-
that
at the very
pedestrian access
beginning,
would be through the,
I'm saying, look at alternatives.
right.
Right.
The grand scheme would be to eliminate that parking.
Right.
Have the library entrance open right onto the green
Yeah.
space of the park.
Yeah.
And having said that, we probably wouldn't want to change our southern entrance until we knew that we were going to have adequate parking on the south side of the library, because we wouldn't want to, even though we have the parking structure on the north, we wouldn't want to lose the southern parking, the more convenient parking.
Is there much of a southern entrance? I mean, every time I come in, it's off the east side.
The entrance right now is on the public entrance is on the east side. There's a dock right here that serves as a staff entrance, but the public entrance is on the east side. And so, I mean, in our view of things, we really look at ourselves as kind of central to everything that's going on in the downtown area, including the residential area at the Americana, the commercial area, ARC. And so our orientation, I mean, way back when, on the east probably made sense, but now it's making less and less sense as all the new development is coming in, and we really would like to provide a more visible presence. We're in the middle of an interior design where we're looking at our new services, current services and new services that will be of benefit to the new community and add to the vitality of the new community. So
Where do you want to put the entrances?
the entrance would be right in there. There's a bank of, I think, 8 or 9 windows along here where an entrance could be placed. Ron, if you backtrack a little bit, there's a picture of it. No, keep going. Yeah, there. So this is the north face of the building. So in very preliminary talks with architects and with our Public Works Department, it is feasible to build an entrance somewhere in here. Whether it takes up 2 of these windows or 1 of these windows would have to be determined, with some kind of stairwell that goes up into the library. And if we did a north and a south side, then the thought is that we would bring pedestrian traffic through the center of the building and possibly consolidate our service desks into the center of that main reading room, which would provide much more efficient service to people. Wouldn't have to be bounced from desk to desk to desk.
Well, is eventually both a north and a south
And south.
entrance and exit, so you'd have some flow through the library with
Because you
the
can-
intake being right in the center of what is now the big room.
You're going to have your 2 parking structures, Orange Street Garage to the north, underground parking to the south, so you need both entrances.
Right. And as I said before, we could go ahead in anticipation of everything happening around us and the fact that our existing parking is directly across the street from this, begin with reorienting just the north, and then eventually having that pass through
Cindy,
to the
is the
south.
south side structurally just like this?
Yeah, pretty
Okay,
much.
so the south side is a mirror image of this, so you do the same thing on the south at some point.
The only issue I have, Mr. Mayor, is the library building is a very nice-looking building. It's one of the nicest buildings we have in the core downtown. And I think it's designed symmetrically to have that open feeling as you drive by. You see all those windows, people sitting inside. It's very, very pleasing, modern building. And you plop an entrance in the middle of this thing, and you're going to change the look of this building, the architecture of the building, to an extent. And I have some issues with that. I think maybe if you want to have a little bit more accessibility to the building and lining it up with your parking, maybe you can go a little bit more this way to the parking area and do it there instead of destroying this whole facade in there. For me personally, I think the entrance where it is fine. I don't have any problem. You can walk. It's only, probably 30 steps to get to the entrance. Spending all this money for 30 steps, and also, I don't know, structurally, I think changing the design of that building, it doesn't make sense to me. I think on the south side, when we do change the parking, that's a good thing to have a connection, to have somebody coming from the south. That I don't have an issue as much, because now you will have an open area to the park and all that. But to do this to the front, I think we're going to take a very nice-looking building and just chop it up to pieces.
And I share your concern. I'm very concerned about this building being an architecturally significant building. I think the only way we would do it is if we had an architect involved who would be sensitive to the existing architecture. As far as putting an entrance to the west, we have looked into that, and that would, because of the grading of the building, would involve, and the fact that we have a lower level on the west half of the building that's below the main part of the library.
Why not leave it where it is?
Yeah.
Why not just leave the entrance where it is? It's nice. It has a nice sculpture there. It's got nice green area. It has a nice little entrance there. I mean, it may need a little bit cleaning up, but outside of that, it's designed beautifully.
And I mean, I think we might retain the east entrance if we were to do this, but we really want to establish that nexus with the surrounding development that's more on the other sides. I mean, that's what our thoughts are at this
Why don't you let a
point.
good architect look at it? You have to make every entrance ADA compliant anyhow, so that's not going to be steps up. A good architect could present some good alternatives.
Yeah.
I personally don't like the east entrance. Too many people sit down there, smoking down by the tree.
Well,
to me, it's not a very good entrance.
I mean,
That's my opinion.
Excuse me, sorry. The other thing that's come up, Councilman Yosefian, is we recently did a survey of our in-house users, and I think we had over 1,000 responses. And one question we asked was, what are your main issues? I'm just sort of a generic, what are your main issues with the library? Beyond the questions that we asked, and the number one response was the inconvenience of the east side entrance. And amazingly, people actually came up with solutions for other entrances. People with small children walking in the building have a hard time. It's less convenient. But amazingly, there are a lot of people that
What do they
complain
mean by
about the east
less
side.
convenient? Is because there are steps, or they need to have
Well,
ramps?
they have to walk further. They have carriages. They're carrying a whole lot of books and other materials. And
I'd like to help answer that one.
okay.
You have the access to the actual library, unless you are absolutely familiar with the layout there, you don't even notice that you can walk around that whole pit that's there. Otherwise, you approach the library from the east entrance, and you climb down into a pit, and then climb back up out of the pit in order to enter the library. And it is, every time and I was there yesterday, and I see seniors that don't even see that other walk-around over there, that are climbing up and down out of this thing with great difficulty. I know I've never liked it.
So eliminate the pit.
And the other thing is, it's sort of like climbing down into this dark hole of an entrance there.
Yeah.
And plus, you run this through this phalanx of people sitting there with their cigarettes and the whole deal there. So
A little food court.
Mr. Starbird?
Yeah, I guess my encouragement would be, at some point, we should have an architect sensitive to the building come up with some concepts. I think, what struck me, although it seems like a lot of expense just for another entrance, and why isn't the easterly entrance okay? This really is a grand building in the downtown. There are few public spaces that exist in Glendale that are really as great as this public space. And some of the author presentations that the Friends have had, like when Jane Fonda was here, to see that room used as an auditorium, you begin to realize it really has a lot of use in the community beyond a library. For functions like that. A right design could really take a beautiful building and even showcase it more if you did the right kind of job with the right entrance on the building. It could make this building even have a greater presence in the downtown than it does now, because it has always struck me, we seem to have the entrance to what almost feels like the back of the library, because you go around to the quiet little residential street and you kind of come in what seemed like almost a side entrance for what is just a tremendously grand building.
Mr. Draymond?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm not advocating that we change the side of the building where the entrance is. I don't know, frankly, and that's why I would also suggest that we take a look at a design and see.
Mm-hmm. And the complaints that I've heard sitting on council have, not one has been the entrance and the location of the entrance. It has been hours of operation, it has been the maintenance, the chairs, the carpeting, the tables, that sort of thing.
That too.
So we're certainly not here to design the library, but you're giving us some thoughts as to where we might be going what's the outlook on this one, Jim? Is there anything in the...
What's the cost?
Well, we don't have anything plugged
Nothing
in.
in
You
the
see the
first 10
cost
years.
estimates there. The reorientation is in the neighborhood of $1.5 million or so.
But this portion of it, preliminarily is $250,000 per entrance. But that's without an architect's opinion.
And what you'd want to do is, this is one where if you had some interest, you'd probably first plan for some planning money, put some money in to have an architect come in and do some concepts and designs. Again, what happens on the south side depends a lot on the timing for the eventual development of Central Park, which has a lot to do with the development on Brand, and at what point in time might there be the opportunity for some additional parking. Because until you can address the Central Park situation, then frankly a southerly entrance doesn't make a lot of sense, because you've still got the parking, you've got the issue of the AC and the electrical facility that needs to be moved, and then you're getting into some fairly sizable dollars. And that should probably be part of a much bigger project to address Central Park.
When you do look at the subterranean parking on the south side, you're going to have to find an ADA compliant way to get people from the subterranean garage up into the library,
Right.
elevator or ramps.
Right.
So there's going to be more cost involved in that one.
I will note that Central Park, Central Library, these facilities are probably all eligible for utilization of tax increment money. They're not in the project area, but they're right on the border of the project area. So, again, you have a lot of demands on your redevelopment agency money, but this is a project along with Central Park that if you place it a high enough priority, it could be eligible for use of tax increment at some point in time. And we've noted that in the form here.
If I might add, Mayor Najarian, to your comment about complaints about the furniture, we are actively working with an architectural firm on an interior design and expect updated furnishings and a new look for the
nicer
library.
carpet. Mr. Mayor,
Can we get a material board?
I think one of the things that we may have to, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the $850,000, which is the Central Park Americana connection and equipment relocation, I'm considering, I guess you're talking about the air conditioning?
Right.
To be,
Right.
This is $850,000 is the air conditioning relocation? Okay, and is this currently under 2008, 2009?
No.
Budgeted under that?
It's not budgeted.
So it's not budgeted?
The years don't really relate to...
Okay, because it's written in black under 2.8. Was it
I'm
previously?
wondering.
No.
So it was never budgeted at all?
It hasn't been budgeted. It's always been enough.
That is correct.
That's correct.
But again, you're going to have pieces of this that are going to have to be sequenced, like Central Park is going to be after some of the other things. And it doesn't look like it'll be 08.
And the ultimate development of Central Park really can't happen until we've got some concrete ideas about where the development along Brand and that block is going to go, the DPHO property and that building
So
and all of that.
in the prioritization that we're going to be doing, this really starts to slip to the bottom, too.
Well, I think it does in turn. It's just a matter of timing. This is probably out in that 2009-10 to 2011-12 range someplace.
Okay,
Because
so
I
we're guessing-
suspect the Americana will be open. We're beginning to get some sense of interest from the DPHOs on development of their property. But again, that's at the very early conceptual stages, so that's probably two to 3 years away before you see something concrete happening there. And then the ultimate build-out of the ARC happens sometime after that.
Yeah, so
Well, wouldn't you want to do the equipment removal, because it has to be done anyway, regardless of what happens to anything? It's in the path
Right.
of travel.
When you're ready to do the passageway development, that's when you should remove the equipment, because then otherwise you really won't be making a connection. And you can have a connection even if you haven't eliminated the parking, but at least you've got a visual connection from the passageway. But again, the passageway is going to flow sometime after the opening of the Americana, which is the latter part of this year. And again, you've got businesses and our buildings there that have to be relocated. Again, we'd like to, I think, address the passageway at the time we have some sense of where the DPHO property is going to go relative to development. And there are a number of things that are kind of up in the air related to that, so I think the passageway is probably 2 years away at this point
At least.
before you know what conceptually it might look like. So again, that puts you out in that 2010, 2011 timeframe. And what you'll find, the biggest pressure is going to be in these first few years of your CIP. When we come back to begin setting priorities, the biggest pressure is in the first few years, because that's where you'd like to see things happen that are high priority, and that's where you're going to have the most pressure on your
that's why I
resources.
keep asking these questions. Seems like a lot of these are in
Oh,
the
yeah.
out years, so we don't have to worry
A
about
lot of
it
these
right
are,
now.
well, you need to worry about them because they take a lot of pre-planning, but they're probably in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
The next two items on the agenda, I think, are for George to cover, related to the
And we've
ARC and parks. Or
we've
should
almost
we-
touched on them relative to Central Park
Right.
underground parking
Should
and
we
Central
move-
Park landscaping. George, remind us what we have built in the budget for Central Park once the ARC is built.
Well, we have about 500,000 built in the Central Park.
What we have
That's just to
called
green
sort
it
of
up.
a minimum greening of the park. That's essentially turf, but no grand landscaping plan.
Right. Well, at some point, I think what we'd like to do is have a path, a walking path for the seniors and anybody else that would go there, fountains, benches, a number of amenities, exercise stations that the seniors can use. But at this point, it's just to green up once we demolish whatever's left of the buildings there.
So the main reason for just doing green up is because we may have to tear up that green up
Right.
later to
Exactly.
put underground
Right.
parking in there. George, remind me, as I saw it on the drawings earlier, we have the path of travel, and then there's parking south of that. In the grand scheme that we talked about in the past, that parking was going to go, right? Because we were taking all of that parking and putting it underground.
The
So
parking around
the parking on the west side of the library,
Yes,
all of that was going to go,
Right.
and it was going to basically be green
right.
all the way. Okay.
Now, there was,
I remember it's been a
once
while.
again, as Mr. Weir points out, all this is a matter of sequencing. Before that can happen, though, we need to have some sense of what's going to happen with those private properties on Brand. And no doubt, with the opening of the Americana, when the DiPietros bring to ground a concept for their properties, I think we'll see something eventually happening along that frontage. What it is right now, we don't know, so as a result, we can't really plan for the interface at this point.
And the other thing they might bring forward is a shared underground parking.
Right. We're anticipating
We
that.
need to know what the DiPietros are going to do.
In fact, one of the advantages we have to offer the DiPietros is the size of their site does not lend itself to effective underground parking, efficient underground parking, or cost-effective. But being able to get outside the boundaries of their property into the public right-of-way and the park then really lends itself to some cost-effective subterranean parking that could support a much better utilization of their property and the properties to the north of the passageway.
So they have everything to gain by
Oh, absolutely.
working with
There's
us.
every reason for all the property owners and us to partner in the eventual development of whatever happens in that block.
And in that discussion, I think we talked about several phases of underground parking, and what we do with the park really depends on how much parking there is in that
So we
subterranean.
don't want to invest a lot in infrastructure in the park if it's going to be torn up in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Does the library go down below grade? So if you build a parking structure, you can basically attach it?
Yes, there's a basement.
There is? So this way you
The
can have
loading
the
dock
elevator?
level, if you go
Well, yeah.
down, that's the first
We talked
level.
about an elevator
Okay.
coming straight up
Right.
into the
So
entrance
you
area.
can come right in there, okay.
That'll be fun.
Okay.
And this $18 million is the cost of how many spaces?
I think
600
600 cars at $30,000, $35,000 per
And
space.
that's two levels?
Right.
Just two levels, okay.
Thank you. Next.
The next item is Grand Library. Grand Library is our art and music library, and it includes a recital hall and a gallery. It is considered, in terms of our unfunded projects, our number one priority. We've deferred maintenance or major maintenance and systems upgrades for probably the past 10 to 20 years in anticipation of a renovation. It is our busiest branch beyond Central Library, with about 17% of people that visit libraries visiting the Brand Library. This beautiful facade, and this photograph was actually taken by Bob McFall. This beautiful facade belies what really is happening on the interior, which is very inefficient use of space, inadequate or sometimes non-existent ADA access, and overcrowding of the resources that we have. In 2000, we completed a master plan, and that master plan has served as a guide to whatever renovation we're going to be doing. In 2002, we completed a historic structures report that gave us an idea of what the building was like when Mr. Brand lived in it, and also hopefully will serve as a guide to what we do with the building in the future to better reflect the history of the building. We have a couple options on the table for consideration. Ron, if you could go to the next slide. Option one has already been funded, and I think, as Nancy explained earlier in another meeting, it's covering kind of the back-of-house items, the seismic retrofit, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, set at industry norm, ADA upgrades in compliance with legal requirements. Although it will benefit the public, in this option, what's already funded, most of it won't be seen by the public because it won't focus on the historic preservation. It won't focus on in a grand scale, on the efficiency of the space. It will focus on these three items primarily, ADA access being probably the most visible to the public.
Let me ask you, on the issue of ADA access, you're going to deal with all the path of travel from the garage into from the parking into the thing. Also, in the process of doing that, are you guys going to deal with the steps? Because some of those steps are cracked,
Right.
some of them are broken. I mean, it's
There has been
bad
some,
shape.
yeah, there has been some minor repair of the steps, but yeah,
Very minor.
yeah, they do need to be
Okay.
restored. Yes.
Okay, so that's included in the option 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then option 2, which is unfunded and would have a price tag of about $3.1 million, includes everything in option 1, but it would upgrade the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing to include climate controls and more state-of-the-art equipment. It would include ADA upgrades beyond legal requirements. One of the things that the master plan proposed was an elevator coming from the downstairs parks area to the upstairs area. It wouldn't necessarily have to be from the parks area, but some kind of elevator access from the lower level, and that would require excavation and an increased cost. It could conceivably think of a unified entryway that would encompass the Parks Department and the studios below us and the library, and it would include a roof replacement. If you could go to the next slide.
Wait.
Sorry.
You lost me on the first part completely.
Okay, sorry.
I
Go
don't know
ahead.
what you're talking about.
Which part?
Access from the parts section to upstairs.
The lower level of the library on the west side is the Parks studio
It's classrooms.
and classrooms.
Okay. Is the new
the rec-
building.
Right, the newer
Talking
building.
about
The
a new
newer, I'm
building.
sorry, the
Lower level of the
1969
new-
building. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's the area that's actually underneath the gallery and the
Right.
conservatory and all
Right.
of that. That's the
Okay, so you're
classrooms
talking
underneath.
putting an elevator there.
In
to
the
move
new
it-
part of the building, yes.
New part of the building.
Not in the
That's
old
not
part of the building.
historical.
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's not. When you said brand library, I'm thinking about the old building, and I'm going, what?
So this is
No,
the
I'm
new
sorry.
area.
Okay.
And Cindy, to be clear, how much was the option 1 that we do have funded?
4.7.
So 4.7.
That's being funded.
That's been funded. My only note is that the note that it includes option 1, well, option 1's been funded. So the 3.1 million is in addition to the 4.7 and gets you everything from the MEP on down.
Right.
Okay.
And then on the next page, there's more that gets
What year do we put the 4.7 in, do you recall?
the next 2 years beyond.
Okay, so
And 900,000 was this year.
7, 8, or was it 8, 9, 9, 10?
They currently have 3.7 that's been in there for a number of years.
Right.
Okay.
And then we added 900,000 this year.
Okay, this year, so 07, 08.
Now, what is MEP?
Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. I learned that too in discussions with
Mechanical,
Public
electrical, and
Works.
plumbing.
Okay, but I thought we were doing that on option 1.
These are upgraded. This is more state-of-the-art equipment, climate control that you can control from remote sites.
Now, what's the cost of that?
Yeah, I don't have that broken down in
Okay,
front of me.
the reason I'm asking this is, on option 1, we're doing mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And so when you're doing all of those, it's always cheaper to do this type of control installation, equipment, or whatever, all at the same time, instead of coming back and trying to retrofit it. It costs you sometimes twice as much. So that's why I wanted to know if we included this on that part. So you did all your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and all your controls all at the same time, it'd be a heck of a lot cheaper, but I don't know what the number is.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, you're right. It would be cheaper to do it all at the same time. Where we made the split is in the base amount is the core infrastructure part. It's the units themselves. It's the core plumbing, the core electrical system. We broke out the climate controls because you can do that separately. As we did in our facilities when we upgraded to the computer-operated remote site type climate control system, that we did separately here. We can do that here as well. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but you're right. Ideally, if we had the money, doing it all at once makes sense.
Well, and the reason I'm asking for that is, we did some of the work in here, and afterwards, and we still are doing it. It's not finished yet.
Well, that's the security aspect of it.
Well, you know, they're all the controls.
Right.
And that's my question, is what is that breakdown? I mean, is it 200,000? Is it 100,000?
Let me get that number for you.
Yeah,
So
that would be
we
very
can show you.
helpful. I would appreciate that. Is the roof in good shape, or is it leaking?
The roof was replaced, 5 years ago? Right. The roof was replaced 5 years ago, and I think it has a 10-year lifespan. So as we progress through this project, we've talked to Public Works, and their recommendation is to replace it within the span of this project.
What type of a roof do you have? Is it a flat roof?
It's a flat roof, yeah.
And what you used last time? You was a torch down?
Turn over to...
It was a torch down you put in?
Well, yeah, but Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, what we did last time is we shed the membrane on the top, replace that. What we'd like to do here is go down and take the whole thing off and start over again. Where we put in the new foam membranes underneath, then begin to layer it up to the surface. We didn't do that the last time.
Oh, okay.
We just took the skin off, redid that, retarred it. Okay. So this would be a complete roof replacement.
Okay.
Mr. Draymond.
I just have a quick question about it says includes climate controls. I want to know, is that specifically air and heat, or are you also talking about climate controls for the gallery?
Humidity, et cetera.
Yeah.
This, to the best of my knowledge, includes cooling and heating.
Okay.
I don't know if, Cindy, if you guys talked about the humidity or control. Okay. Is that included in here?
Yeah, the recital hall.
Okay, so it is, Mr. Draymond.
Well, no, I'm not talking about just air and heat. I'm talking about for the gallery itself. In other words, if down the line, I think Mr. Weaver knows where I'm going with this, if down the line the city wanted to have a traveling exhibit to come to Glendale, we couldn't do it. I don't know about the gallery, the size of gallery space anyway, but you couldn't do it without some kind of climate control, relatively modern climate control for that gallery. No major exhibit would ever, no major museum in the country would ever send an exhibit for money or otherwise to a gallery that has no climate control at all for humidity, and et cetera. And if we ever really want to go that direction, so that even if we don't have a collection of our own, but if we want to bring something like that to the city. So that's what I was curious when it said climate control. I didn't know if you just meant general air and heat, or whether you meant something more.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Draymond, general air and heat is what this includes. We hadn't gone beyond to look at the fine-tuning of the gallery with regards to other type of control measures.
Mr. Weaver, did you have a comment?
Yeah. Just curiosity. When was Brand Mansion built?
Right 1904.
1904? Mm-hmm. And so that means about every 5-10 years they replace the roof? I mean, now we're talking only 10-year life. How many years did that thing go without any change in roof?
That roof was on there for it was at least 20, 25 years before we did.
What kind of materials did they use then that we don't use now? Are we getting 10 years out of ours?
Well, that's why we have other maintenance issues in the building.
Funny when I heard it.
Generally, if we were to go down, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Weaver, if we're going to go down and replace this, a complete replacement, you're looking at more in the 20 to 25 year lifetime range. That's generally on a complete re-roof what we're looking for. Take care of it, we can get 30 out of it. But generally, you even get a guarantee for 20 years.
Mr. Brand built a good building with a good roof. He made it about 40, 50 years without a replacement.
He didn't cheat on anything that we found that he constructed, even out into the park areas where he's built certain facilities. He didn't spare a dime to build it. He built it right.
A little more spendthrift.
Mr. Quintero.
Remember, he built in 1904. That was before the city of Glendale was even incorporated. So there was no city. They didn't have to get permits from us.
What year was the modern building built?
1969.
69.
69.
Okay. You're going to talk about phase 3 now?
No, actually, we haven't finished option 2.
Oh.
Option 2 would also include interior structural changes to improve efficiencies, like consolidated desks that we're talking about here. As you probably know, Brand is a series of tiny little rooms, and we've got 3 different service desks. So in a remodel, we'd like to consider one desk that would more efficiently serve the public. Then exterior, minor repairs to the exterior. It looks like it's in pretty good shape, but it does need some attention. And then historic rehabilitation related to the budgeted work. For instance, if we do a new roof, then we would do it with a sensitivity to the historic nature of the building and the stucco and everything else that's related to a roof. And then basic landscaping of the surrounding park would be included in option 2. Then, any questions on option 2? That's it. That's the end of that one. Option 3 would include option 1 and 2. In option 3, we would be able to do more historic preservation rehabilitation. All our work would be in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. The building is not registered nationally. It is registered locally, and we would make sure that all our work was in compliance, which would increase costs. In option 3, we would also consider energy efficiencies consistent with green building requirements, but with an older building, there are probably issues with that. We'd have to explore it. We haven't explored it much at this point. And then the next slide would include all the work would be completed based on the findings of the historic structures report. So we could restore fireplaces, we could restore doors that weren't there before, we could focus more on the Tiffany stained glass windows, and really do the rehabilitation of the historic elements in the best possible way. We also include an interpretive room to archive the history of Brand family. Right now, our archives are down in the cellar and not available to the public, and we'd really like to see those made available to the public. They're available, many of the photographs, all the photographs are available digitally, but we'd like to create a room that was like a little museum to the Brand family. And then we'd like to re-landscape reflective of the Brand era without the peacocks.
I think you answered my question. I was thinking, taking like the bedroom or something, L.C. Brand, and making it a mini museum, since so much of the history is related to him.
Yeah.
I don't know where his rooms were upstairs, probably with the view to the south.
Yeah, his bedroom was in the tower on
Facing
the east
south?
side, facing south.
Yeah, that was converted to a mini museum.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
There are probably ADA issues with that because there's a circular stairwell that goes up to it. But in one area that we're looking at is the salon, where there's a beautiful fireplace that was not destroyed in the renovation in the 1950s. A lot of the architectural features were lost in the 1950s, and that's what the Historic Structures Report looked at, what had been lost and what could be restored. The building, the library, I should refer back, the library became a library in 1956.
Well, that's after the family tried to sue us and take the property back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, listen, the city made a documentary out of it. I watched it. That's what I learned. It was a city documentary. I learned that. I didn't know.
Yeah, Mr. Brand died in the 20s, and he bequeathed, as you know, the land and the property
His
for the
wife
purpose
lived
of
in
the
there.
park and the library. And then in the 40s, she died. And then between, I think, 43 and 56, it became the haunted house of the
Right.
northern section of Glendale. And then the family
Right.
finally...
Family basically
in.
had to threaten that they were going to take the property back.
Yeah.
And at that point, the city council went in, I think, a couple of $1 million or something like that.
Yeah.
And it spent to actually create the library.
And so the library opened in 56, and there was actually a small salon area where they had a gallery and a little recital hall where the solarium is now. And then they expanded in 1969.
$2 million, eh? Now we're going to spend $2 million on a roof.
Yeah. A large, I do know in option 2 that...
Dollar has devaluated a lot, Dave.
In option 2, the $1 million of the 3.1 is dedicated to the ADA access and the elevator. So a good chunk of the money would be an enhanced ADA access beyond the legal requirements.
Okay.
Questions?
Thank you. Is that it for option 3?
And there's no additions to the buildings at all, even to the new section?
At this point, proposed? No.
Right, because at one point there was talks about expanding
Yeah.
the new section in the same motif, and because there's a lot of need for art classes and so on and so forth. I went to several of those hearings. That was eons ago. And of course, at the time, $6 million was put in the account. Later on, when Pacific Edison came in, that money was pulled out of there and put into Pacific Edison, and hence we're talking about it now. So whatever happens to that, there's a need for that, and that's never going to happen, huh?
That was the master plan that we completed in 2000 recommended, I think it was a 12,000 square foot, full-blown, reaching the maximum expansion, and that had a price tag at that point of $19 million. So we were directed to go back to the drawing board and consider a renovation within the existing footprint. And that's where we are now. We are expecting to come to council at the end of the month with a proposal, an RFP proposal to hire an architect to begin looking at how we'll spend our option 1 money.
Thank you. That's it for libraries. Mr. Weaver.
One general comment, sitting here thinking, back on the Central Library, the amount of traffic that'll be coming down Orange or utilizing Harvard to get to the Americana. If you have the entrance on the north side saying Glendale Central Library and it's architecturally designed right, people could then recognize it as being our central library. To the east where it's hidden around, you can drive right by the library and you don't know what building it is. So it could architecturally be designed to people driving by, oh, there's the Central Library. That could happen with the right design.
Definitely agree that it'll increase our visibility and our presence in that community.
Maybe we could explore a sign along Harvard that says Central Library.
It'll be a lot cheaper. A lot cheaper.
There actually is a sign.
I know there is.
But it's hidden by the trees, so we also need to consider landscaping, but...
We illuminate it.
Listen, if you're going to go
Thank
to
you.
Americana, you're not stopping by the library. You're going to drive by and go there to do your shopping.
Well, we hope they come to the library, too. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up,
Flashing neon lights on and off.
government buildings.
Is that it?
Next up is the old police building reuse.
Did that show ever make it?
No.
Glendale, Metro?
No.
Florida?
Yeah, it was something to do with the production values, the set, they just get...
Wasn't picked up. Our
There's some more coming in.
our caviar dreams were dashed.
I hear there's a couple more coming in. to
We're
do
afraid it was the beefcake
pilots.
fireman that knocked us off, but...
Mr. Zern?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, regarding the reuse of the old police building, as we call it, we're in the process right now. We have an architectural firm, space design firm, going through and laying out the potential reuse, looking at a number of departments in the city that could utilize this space. Parks is one. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Community development housing is another. We're also exploring the possibility of bringing some of our off-campus facilities back onto campus, health services being one of those. So
particular use is where we're paying rent someplace else.
absolutely. Absolutely. We also have a small...
Neighborhood services back in here now, or it's still we have off campus?
Not sure, Madeline?
Neighborhood services, do we still rent facilities for neighborhood services? Madam? No.
We used to for a while down the street.
Yeah, we've had them.
No,
Not
Mr.
anymore?
Mayor, that was never approved.
Oh, okay, that's
And,
right. That's
yeah,
right.
that was never approved, so Neighborhood Services has never moved.
Never moved, okay. Because I know Mr. Troncoso wanted you guys out of his building,
He was even willing to pay for it.
and he was willing to even pay for it to get you out of the building. That tells you something about it.
Yeah, that's correct. That proposal was never approved, so
Madeleine's always
everybody
willing to
is
move, it's just a
intact.
matter of price.
Mr. Mayor, we're also, just to finish, we also have, as you know, our facilities maintenance administration operations sitting in modular units behind, to the west of our parking structure, and we need to get them out of there. So we also want to try to carve a space for them in this facility as well. Again, just reiterating what I've said before, our idea here is to try to utilize the building, and I think it's the words Mr. Usafian used. The building has good bones, and we believe it has good bones. And we're going to try to utilize as much of the existing layout as we have in incorporating some of these departments.
I stole that from Sir Ganji, by the way.
Okay.
It's just the heart, lungs, internal organs that we have concerns about. All the vital organs we're concerned about.
The skeleton is great. The rest is on life support, so we'll see what we can do. But
Special digestive system.
we do have, again, in addition to just the general space layout and how we put some of the various departments in here. We have some of the vital organs, the MEP, as you saw in the discussion of the libraries, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Primarily the mechanical, the heating and cooling of the facility. We also have some issues with the lighting. We've been working with Glendale Water and Power to utilize public benefit charge money to upgrade these types of systems because we can convert them to much more energy efficient. As many of you remember, we converted all of the lighting in the city several years ago to energy efficient lighting and reaped a great benefit from that. So we're about 50% done with the space utilization part of it. You'll see there's no dollar amount here yet. We have some existing funds that were put in there several years ago. But again, the idea is not a lot of demo, not a lot of new hard walls, great utilization of systems furniture. We obviously have a couple of, inside the mechanical, we have elevator issues, and we have the ADA issues that we're going to have to deal with. But we think we can accomplish this.
You got some electrical issues to do.
We have
plumbing issues.
We actually, Mr. Safin, we found the plumbing is in pretty good shape only because over the
sewer
years,
line used to keep back up.
right, and in that case, that was a operator error as opposed to a systems failure. So we dealt with that.
Whatever the heck that means.
That means the prisoners were trying to flush down their stuff around the building.
Steve, one thing I feel very strongly about, you have an L-shaped building there. That parking lot behind there ought to be incorporated in structure to make it a rectangular. Use the square footage. You don't need that parking out there. I mean, people are parking there, but I don't see where it's essential and you get a lot more square footage for a building.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Weaver, when we come back to you with what we find on our space utilization with some harder numbers on options for what we can do,
That'll be
I think,
there.
Mr. Weaver, if you recall, I had that looked at. I had it looked at from a number of situations. One was to continue to have ground level parking and provide office space that would adjoin the building. The other was to try to connect the existing Civic Center parking structure into it and create another wing of the parking structure as well. All of those obviously very expensive. Structurally, it takes some doing. As you know, it can be engineered. It's just a matter of money.
Or it can be a two-story building without parking.
We could put just a straight box building in there to fill that space.
You know how many square footage are in that parking lot?
I'd have to go back and look, Mr. Weaver. We do have estimates on that. I don't recall them
Fair
offhand.
amount. If you're
But
talking about
when I come
consolidating.
back with some more detail on this, I'll include all those options as well.
I mean, I know the expensive structural ones, the connections, but one option less expensive would just be to put up a box and connect it in.
Correct. That ends up probably being the most viable because it is very difficult to connect,
Yes.
build a new wing, if you will, onto the building.
Mr. Quintero.
I hope when you look at the interior, you make sure and at least get a bid for going with a, if you want to call it industrial look or, et cetera, where you can just polish the concrete floors, the beams would be exposed, you can hang the lights, et cetera. So rather than bringing it up to Brand Boulevard Class A standards, just a nice industrial look, which is very popular, very contemporary, and I think the city will save lots of money if we go in
Mr.
that
Mayor, Councilmember
direction.
Quintero.
Yeah, just like the new building at Disney.
We actually looked at this building lends itself to that. If you
right.
go into the bathroom facilities, the tile that was used, the actual facilities themselves, the plumbing facilities in there, they're great. I mean, you just don't see that anymore, and we don't want to destroy that, but sort of take off of that, and that kind of minimalist industrial type scenario makes a lot of sense. So it's something we're going to look at, absolutely.
And it'll be cheaper, there's no
It
question
would,
about
yeah.
it.
Saves you on floor covering and ceiling tile and so forth.
If you look at what Disney has done in their Phase 1 buildings,
That's the way.
One last question. Are you doing anything in the interim to provide heating and air conditioning in that building?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Weaver, the enterprise fund operation, enterprise operation, I'm sorry, Ron, and the radio shop folks that are over there, we've brought in portable cooling units. We brought
Because I
those
was in there just a week or two ago, and they're sweltering with portable fans blowing the hot air around in circles.
We actually brought in portable chilling units for them So we purchased those for the various. Now, the whole building may not feel it, but
No,
we've
but
got
where
it
the
in the
workers
critical
are,
areas.
it still didn't feel comfortable to me, and they're working that for months.
Skate to work. Mr. Yusefian?
I tend to think differently than one of my colleagues. I think there is a shortage of parking for the city staff. Currently, if you go to the restaurant next door, which is supposedly empty now, the parking lot is packed. Guess who parks there? Every single one of those cars belong to an employee from City of Glendale. I know that for a fact because I had to have somebody go into that car and get something, and we actually walked down there. I go, "Why are you parking here?" They go, "Because there's no parking available in the structure." There's no parking available in the structure. We currently have some parking that is available at the Ralph's building.
Correct.
And so that's taken. This is taken, completely parked, and we have no place for our own employees. My suggestion will be is instead of adding more square footage, which will be more employees and not enough parking, we may want to look at possibly putting in more parking, maybe a couple of levels of parking on that L shape and maybe expanding that. Because, if there was any other business in this town who wants to expand square footage, what is the first thing we require them of? You got to provide the parking. How many square feet is that police building?
About 50.
50,000 square foot. 50,000 square foot of space with almost zero parking right now. So if you add that extra square footage, by code, we would require at least 2.7 per. So that's 150 parking spaces almost, and we don't have. And it's a situation that we have right now. Our own employees are literally parking in the streets. So I don't know how much it would cost to build a parking structure there, something lightweight. I mean, that's something that's an option that we need to take a look at.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, as is one of the options we looked at, in addition to what Mr. Weaver was referring to, which was some combination of either office with parking or all office, we looked at just making it another extension of the parking structure with the exception of the bottom level, which is a little difficult, but putting 3 more levels on and having you be able to access that from the existing structure. So we have that as a scenario. We'll have to go back and reprice it. Not cheap, as I'm sure you can imagine, but it is certainly an option what I will bring back to you.
Can't it be independent so it doesn't have to connect to the other building? That connection is going to cost you a lot of money.
It is, Mr. Yusefian. The problem is you have such a tight space. How
Thank
difficult
you.
how you're going to get
That's
up there.
exactly what I'm getting at.
You could go down, but again, now you're at to $35,000 of space to go subterranean. But it's such a small area.
Yeah.
Our concern was how would you access the upper levels if you weren't accessing it
You
from the
can't.
existing?
You're losing too much space on the ramp. And if you come in from the second or third, you're going to have to loop it in and out. So I'd like to know the cost per space. It's going to be through the roof. You can't
Let's
just
get the
in and out.
options, Steve.
We'll be coming
so
back to
we
you
know
with
what
a
we're dealing with
full
here.
boat.
Yes. I'm not talking about just having that little section. Okay? Right now, we have the section that is behind where we have all the police cars and so on and so on being
Or you're talking about the whole
repaired.
section.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, we'll look at that
You
as well.
could still have the bottom floor for the police use, but you will be able to get more of a span and use that airspace right now being wasted. And since you don't have those plywood-built maintenance facilities sitting out there, by the way, they love it. Don't get me wrong.
But they did a very nice job.
Right, but if that is gone into the building, then now you have this big area, you will not have as much of a problem as far as circulation is concerned.
And Mr. Yusefian, as we were doing some of our brainstorming, we kind of noodled out that as well. So we'll be able to get you some details on that.
Okay.
Yeah, cross that out, please, so
Oh, ahead of
us.
we can compare them side by side. Mr.
I
Quintero.
also would like you to work with GWP or whoever else you need to work with to see about putting some solar panels on top of the new, redone police building. I think that would be a very good idea, and maybe even whatever parking we come up with, do solar above that.
Absolutely, Mr. Quintero. I think with
Very
our,
green of you, Mr.
our long-range
Quintero.
planning effort and the environmental
Just
subgroup
reminded
that we
me.
have, they are aggressively looking at all options, both new and existing, where we can try to capitalize on some of these green building type of improvements. So definitely.
Because remember, structurally, he's right. Structurally, that building was designed to have another story added on later. So,
You're referring to the old police building? Yeah.
Right. So it is going to have the strength in the foundations to basically handle the extra weight on roof.
Thank you, Mr. Zern. City Hall? City Hall, Mr. McFall?
These projects are actually linked together. If I actually, Ron, go back up to the. If you notice, the City Hall renovation has a comment linking it to the rehab of the old police building. This is the rehab of the old police building is is somewhat akin to opening a can of worms. Is after some determinations are made about the reuse of the old police building, if in fact it involves ultimately the decision to relocate, for example, the parks administrative operations, that creates opportunities within this existing building for reusing that space in some type of an effective manner. So what we wanted to do was to provide council with some potential thoughts. These council chambers are an opportunity that range all the way from a somewhat of a mild restoration or renovation of the existing chambers as they are to something more significant, even potentially including relocating and reconstructing the council chambers. And the reuse of the building is one of the foundational issues that would create that as an opportunity. So without spending a lot of time trying to do cost estimates, what we've provided in the relocation of the council chambers is the extremes, all the way from a creation of a new building, if the council was interested in creating a whole separate chamber somewhere, to relocating or renovating the existing council chambers, and then moving that into the next line item, is the City Hall renovation itself.
Who wants to talk about that?
I would say you have a lot of public support for relocating our city council to say, I don't know, Lompoc.
How about in the old police building?
Lompoc,
That might be, Well, I know there's a lot that we would like to say. Mr. Youssef.
Well, I think this is something that when Mr. Gomez was here, actually, we talked about this. And he brought up an issue that I agreed with him at that time. I still agree with him today, which is our seats, our chairs right in here for the audience when they sit there after a couple of hours, kind of blood stops going to the rest of your body. So it does. I mean, it stops.
Some people said about us up here, the blood.
Or start. I think this chambers was remodeled in 1973 or 74, something of that nature. So it's been over 30 years. Those cushions are over 30 years old. I mean, they've lasted for a long time, but for God's sake, I mean, smaller cities than us have completely renovated. Pasadena has renovated. Burbank, I mean, I walk over there and look at their seats. It's just amazing how nice they are. They're half our size. Smaller, much smaller cities with 25,000 population, they have nicer facilities for their constituents. To me, I think that's important for at least, if we do nothing, replace these seats so people at least can sit there for 6 hours and be comfortable on that. Also, ADA issues. We do have ADA issues in this room itself. We don't have one yet, but one of these days, if there is someone or one of us turns out to be handicapped somewhere, you never know.
What did you say?
I said, if one of us turns out to become handicapped, we will have a hard time trying to get up here.
Handicapped in the air.
Oh, yeah. You're in a good shape form today, aren't you?
You walked into that one.
So, I think we need to at least consider And we talked about this. We had a budget for what it would cost to redo this. I think Mr. Manukian had suggested it in the past, and I think it would be very important because the way the dais is shaped, to help the mayor, it would be a good idea for us to have that, we had figured out was like 3,000, whatever.
The management system?
The management system that will be in front of the mayor, so he can actually know who is asking to speak next, and maybe also give the mayor an opportunity to put a certain amount of time limit on some of us to speak, so we would know how long we're speaking. I think that type of a thing will be very helpful to future mayors when it's installed. But I think we need to do something. And also downstairs, the carpet outside is, now we changed some of the carpet on the other one, but the rest of it is all falling apart. The wallpaper is coming to pieces.
Steve, on that note, what's the status of the budget for carpeting, wallpaper?
Well, and I'm glad you asked, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Starbird. As Mr. Yusefian indicated, several years ago now, we had come with a number of upgrades to this building, including some we've accomplished with fire life safety systems that we've put in, some of the management services work that we did. And we had in here some basic, what I will call cosmetic upgrades: carpet, ceiling tile, and chairs, seating in here, and also something with these curtains that I thought we should do something with. Our dilemma has been, since that time, I think it was Mayor Najarian that asked us to come back and look at reconfiguring the dais to make it accessible and compatible with a future council member or staff member who would need to access this, who may be disabled. That's where we find the dilemma. This is a very, very challenging space to work with. Trying to reconfigure, trying to look at, because the other thing we wanted to do is try to make the audio visual easier to work for the audience and for you. And that's where our challenge has been. The reason that has halted some of the work outside of this is I've been looking at some radical changes. Do we take the balcony and move it all the way over? This dead wall in the back, what's behind it? How far back can we go to try to make this space a little larger? So those are all things that we're investigating right now. Structurally, is it at all feasible for us to go this way? Go into what is now the city attorney's office? Would that be possible to try to make this a little bit bigger chamber? And I think in those discussions is where we came up with, maybe we should look at a new building, just as an option, because this is a very, very challenging space.
What if we moved, someday decided to move Parks and Recreation and City Clerk out and move the council chambers to the first floor, so access is much better for everybody coming in, and letting the city attorney expand. Parks and Rec is crowded like heck. So city attorney, let them split a space up here, put the areas that are the most accessible need for the public, the council chambers and personnel, or city clerk, I don't know. But there's a lot of what-ifs depending on what we move where.
Correct.
So I don't think we've even considered the options we yet to do.
And Mr. Weaver, we have thought about the first floor. But it does. You bring up the point. Every time we start talking about something, two or three other things come up. And then we exactly, as you can see in the new, or what I mentioned in the old police building, if we were to move parks out, that leaves you a space down there. What can we do? Can we move somebody? Can the clerk move next door? Can we blow out that bottom part? Can we use those two to combine to try to make some sort of a council chambers on the first floor? There is just a whole myriad of scenarios that we could discuss. Thus, that's why we've kind of put just the basic cosmetic stuff on hold. I don't know how much longer we can do that. We may have to come in and on an interim basis go ahead and do some of the basic cosmetic
I haven't got
work.
any emails on the furniture in here yet.
So hence your explanation why this is connected to the police building.
Exactly what Mr. McFall mentioned. And then we started to look at, well, what if we didn't put so-and-so over there and put somebody else over there? So we've even gone in from the MSB to the Perkins building looking at different scenarios of how things could move around the city. As you take somebody from here and put them over there, Glendale Water and Power doesn't seem to have the great need that they once did for the space in the Perkins building, so that could possibly give us an option to move somebody over there. Maybe somebody from this building, maybe somebody from MSB that then we can move. You see, it's become a puzzle. Very, very challenging puzzle, but
that was the point that I was going to make. As we continue to look at options, for example, if community development and housing did move into the old police building, as Mr. Zurin indicated originally, the thought was that there was going to be expansion of some of the engineering services for GWP into that space. That need has gone away. So perhaps some other operation could go into that space, maybe out of City Hall, that creates an opportunity to expand the council chamber or the clerk or the city attorney. The point, though, is that as we keep going through this and try to use a minimal approach, then we start looking, well, once we do that, that creates an opportunity. What do we do with that space or with this need? It seems like in the end, while we somewhat keep trying to avoid it, a somewhat campus-wide space planning effort is probably going to be necessary to really answer all these questions all at one time, so that we don't end up spending some amount of money making some improvements in one area without really considering the implications that unfortunately just domino out of this. As much as we keep trying to avoid that, because it takes what is a relatively simple project and instantly makes it more complicated. We've been trying to get away from that, but it's hard to. We do have long-term space needs, and that old police building does create a real opportunity for us to rehab something at a relatively low cost. It is a very structurally sound existing building that can help us with these needs, but taking into account all of the domino effects of that is probably the prudent path to go.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone who would disagree that these chambers and this entire building is pretty dilapidated. I mean, we do the best we can. We keep it clean, but just the wear and tear that it gets it needs to be updated. And I think the condition of the building reflects the respect that we give to the community. I mean, people come here for their perhaps the most serious decisions and issues that they're going to face in their lives, whether it's a zoning issue or an ordinance that's going to be passed or licenses or whatever. And it's just nasty. I'm embarrassed sometimes when I've seen some of the other smaller, less respected cities throughout the county. They've got, I'm not talking about Roman columns or anything like that, but they've got updated modern furniture, carpeting, seats for the audience, sound systems, audio-visual systems, and I mean, I hate to dump a lot of money in it because certainly it can be viewed as us feathering our own nest up here.
I'm not taking it home.
I know, clearly.
Don't live here either.
Clearly, but a lot of people, I think, would have that first impression of the city councils taking care of themselves. But it's not for us. These chambers have lasted, 40 years, 50 years. This is for the generations to come, for the new group of leaders and administrators and citizens. So I would like to see something done to it. Mr. Quintero.
There's always someone that disagrees. That's where you made your... Look, I'm for upgrading these chambers, perhaps some seating and the audiovisual and a better system, but overall, I think this dais works, the paneling works, and I just don't want to spend a lot of money to upgrade a room that, is basically used a few times a week with meetings and commissions and so forth, but I'd rather spend the money doing something else. So for me, the idea of, when you're talking about all of the big campus moves, that's a different story, but in terms of if we stay in this chamber, I think just some little better and more comfortable seating, some audio-visual, and if an impaired ADA person gets elected, then we would have to obviously do something or hired, either, in an executive capacity. If we have that issue, then we'll have to do something to accommodate those ADA requirements.
Mr. Weaver.
I hear what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, but I think next week we're going to start looking at trying to prioritize all the things we say we want, and where do we put this in relation to some of the other priorities. That's what I'm trying to sort out. I think this is livable.
That's a tough question.
And this will probably be lower on my priority than some of the other things we've talked about.
Mr. Starbird?
That's why, as Mr. McFall pointed out, a lot of this comes back to the old police building, and, ignoring the creature comforts in this room, the need for operational space in the new police building, from the city attorney to Parks and Recreation to city clerk, there's just more need for operational space. And if you're going to be investing money in facilities, it's going to be difficult to do much of anything in this rectangular space we have for council, and could possibly be used better as operational space for any one of those departments if we can find a way to cost-effectively address the need for council chambers that could be more functional. But that's certainly not going to be an easy, short-range solution, but one that we certainly want to keep on the drawing board. But they all do tend to tie in together.
Do we have any very cursory space planning going on as we think about this? I'm not talking about designing yet or getting that full big step.
Planning. Conceptual
There
planning.
is space planning that's going on, essentially relating to the reuse of the old police building. That has taken us to the inevitable question of, if we move Parks and Recreation into the old police building, what's the best use of that space? Should we expand the city attorney? So, and that's pretty much, frankly, honestly, where we always kind of get stuck, is what do we do with that next step? So yes, there is cursory space planning. Actually, more than cursory, we've actually had a number of different scenarios actually drafted up, so we know how we can reuse the existing police building using the existing walls, offices that are in place. So there's a minimum amount of adjustment to go on.
Mr. Yusefian?
Oh, 3 departments in this building are extremely cramped. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. You walk into Parks and Rec, you're walking in 3-foot aisles between cubicles that are right next to each other. So that department is completely impacted. And as we go through our processes, building more and more parks, maintaining more parks and more open space and so on and so forth, there's going to be need for more people to actually do some of those things. So parks is one place that I think it's outgrown its location a long time ago. Also, parks also interfaces with public. A lot of people come to parks to be able to rent a space and so on and so forth. The second place that gets extreme use and interfaces with public is the city clerk's office. You go to city clerk's office, this is where people go to pull their licenses and so on and so forth, and that's also packed up. All the walls now, they have all the drawers and everything else. They have this fancy little new filing system that's on rails that is moving back and forth. Now, I've never seen anything like that, but it's because of the tightness of the space. And during the election cycle, it's a nightmare over there. There is ballots in people's drawers, underneath the desk, above
I don't know
their
about
heads.
that. I don't know about that, Mr. Yusefian.
Well, I know that. I've seen it. And that's why it took so long to count them, because they had to go around and find all these things.
I don't
I'd
know
like to
about
say
that.
it's a little more organized
Well,
than that.
yeah, well,
Ballots. Lost ballots.
yeah.
Do you have a comment
Yeah.
on this?
Sometimes
I don't
calling
know
it
about that.
the way it is. So, in my mind, in my city attorneys, it's expanding. It was interesting to find out that when Peter Wright was a city attorney in this city, before Mr. Howard was hired, actually by him, there were only 4 city attorneys in the city of Glendale, and that wasn't too long ago. There were only 4 attorneys. Now we're what? How many? 15 attorneys.
Oh, they multiply.
Yeah, in the same space.
They're not all working at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, another hit.
So if I had my druthers, either move the city clerk into the police building and allow the parks to grow, or move parks there and allow them grow. And if you let the city attorneys move over there, then you have more room over here that you could move. The management office right now but we cannot hire another person because we don't have any place to put them, almost. We're running out of that place. So those are some of the things, and I don't know how the HR is working.
I was going to say,
That's packed, too.
Mr. Doyle's sitting back there going, what about me, what about me?
Right. So there's all of these. So I think this building, we're not going to expand this building. It's already been built out. So it's not going to be able to house everyone in here. So I am hoping that maybe what we should do is agendize an item for staff to actually go work on that and come back to us instead of leaving it up in the air, for staff to tell us what direction they're taking.
We are working on it.
May I suggest, once we finish our space analysis of the old police building, we'll come back to you. I'll roll in. I'll dig up the options for utilization of the dead space, if you will, that sits behind the buildings in the Civic Center parking structure as well. But at a minimum, bringing back the old police building scenarios that we came up with. Hopefully, we'll have some.
Well, as it is, it's 50,000 square feet. 50,000 square feet. You don't have 50,000 square feet between four of these departments.
Currently, no.
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 So, if you put them all combined, maybe 15,000 at the most.
But it's amazing once you start to lay it out in what is a more workable format. You can use that space up pretty quickly.
Mr. Mayor, if we can get 4 more projects in, we can wrap up this review before this meeting is over.
Today, for sure. So let's
now
move
the
on to the next
is
item.
adequately defined the space problem here at the Civic Center campus.
Who's ever going to touch on the next one? Is it the document management system?
May I make a suggestion, since Steve is still up here, that we go to the last project, the remodel planning office and permit services, and then we can hop back into the information technology?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, between Mr. Hagani and I, we've talked just overall about how crowded it's gotten, especially in certain places, and this is one of the most widely utilized public areas where the public comes to visit in the city. We originally laid this out many years ago when the Permit Service Center was first formed, and we were tight on space then, and it's grown and grown even more since then. But it's not so much that it's just we don't think it's a matter of not having enough spaces. It's a matter of maybe better utilizing the space we have. Trying to get the two operations to merge together at the counterpoint where zoning and some of the DRB stuff comes together with the Permit Service Center, and make it more of a single type of a center. Go back and rethink some of the office layouts in both the Permit Service Center and the Planning Department. And so with that in mind, we put in this number here of 700.
So we're going back to what it used to be.
That's kind of how it was when I started here.
It's like fashion, if you wait long enough, it goes back to original, and that's how it was.
Right.
It was open all the way, and you used to walk from counter to counter to counter to counter.
It just, even if you're, we were thinking, the idea of having to go out of a door, go down an exterior aisleway, and go into another door. Yeah, it's difference of having to stay inside and walk on a current path that you've got a single counter, we think makes a world of difference. So that's one of the things, and as I said, Mr. Hagani and I have talked about this. We have engaged preliminarily a space design consultant to look at this. Unfortunately, she's the same person that's doing the old police building, so we've had her focusing more of her effort on the old police building, and then we'll come over and take a look at both the Permit Service Center and the planning zoning operation.
So your cost is $700,000?
That's our rough estimate on this.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to cough, too. Okay, I think it's going to be more than $700,000.
Again, what we're going to try to do here, Mr. Yusefian, is use existing office furniture systems, look at less hard wall offices and more systems furniture.
Is this going to replace some of those chairs and all the stuff, or that's different? That's being done?
We're actually pursuing the chair replacement now, ahead of time.
Good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zern.
Next is we have 3 projects from information technology, and we'll start with citywide document management system.
Good morning.
There's no money for you now.
Yeah, I was going to say, bringing up the tail end. Luckily, I've got police and fire on the next one for me, so it can help. Document imaging is actually the FileNet project, and this is really ballooning out as far as we go in department by department, and they're seeing the need and the potential. So we've got people actually coming back in, GWP in different sections coming back into that. But what's a little confusing is the $250,000 from the planning and building fee. We're looking at a technology fee in that. So we still haven't, working with planning on that right now, so we're still not sure if we'll get $250 by, I believe that's 0809. But we're looking at $350 this year and $100 out of the CIP next year and $250 if everything goes right out of the technology fee. And I'm not sure, Bob, where we're...
Maybe just to give a little context, we currently already have a document management system, and we have an imaging system so that our vital documents can be, as you can imagine, electronically stored in for access. The challenge is when you look at the size and the number of documents that the city has, where do you set the boundaries of how far you go? The building department this past number of years had approached the city council and the capital improvement program in order to scan their existing documents to make them more available, to put them in the proper type of storage and media and make them available to citizens and to link them to our existing permitting system. This, and Scott can go into some detail. This would take a next step in identifying and determining additional documents and expansion of the system to be able to provide for the next step of document management. So Scott, if you could note specifically what then this project would do and where it would take us.
So on 07, 08, you already have 350?
No, this is unfunded.
Once again, everything on this list is unfunded.
Okay.
So that was a suggested time frame, but everything is currently unfunded that's on this list.
But there's an existing balance, though.
There is some existing money.
There is some existing money. Yeah, it's on previous ones we have. What we're looking at on the breakdown of the 350 is 250 is the planning historic documents to outsource that and have them all scanned in. And then the 100 would be an implementation for planning. And in the 08, 09 would be 250 for public works engineering documents to be scanned. It's a big price tag, but a lot of these documents are just slowly, we've been over in engineering and over in the second floor of Public Works. Some of those documents, they're in it so often, they're shredding. I mean, I was in one that looked like the Dead Sea Scroll. I mean, physically you're holding it, the edges have all gone, they're all dog-eared, and yet you're in on a daily basis with those. So the scanning is really important on some of these older documents. Newer ones, not quite so much, but again, you're working on newer ones, so it's tough. So
the purpose is to scan these things so you don't have to use them on a paper version, so you can use them electronically?
Right.
That's the purpose.
One of our best bang for the buck is we get out of finance. You go in there, how many times you look for a check that was 2 or 3 years old because you have a vendor in a complaint or whatever. I mean, we've all been down in the archives going through boxes, and while they keep the paper copies excellent, the scanned version, I did one, it was 3 years old, took 4 seconds to come back up. It had all the handwritten notes on there. So it was, you send that to the vendor, it stops. I mean, none of this going round and round. I mean, we get a lot of calls from them saying, hey, I used it in the others, and it works out great. Police, we're working with police right now. We've got GWP billing, we're working after that. So we've got just a number of departments.
That's what I wanted to make clear. The city currently has invested in and has a very robust imaging system. The one that we have is called FileNet. It's one we have migrated to over the last number of years. It is a city standard, and we have a lot of documents that are in that system, and it's being done in a coordinated way. The city council approved funding for what's been called the CSI project. It, in essence, is the replacement of our permitting system. That is linked into this system. So everything it's very linked, it's very coordinated. These documents go into this system that are address related. It gives a single then point of entry into files, so that as staff or as the community is researching files, they would be able to go into those files and see all the documents that are associated to an address. It is the right way to organize it. It is expensive to do, and it takes a lot of time. And so we have tried to go through from the standpoint of priority, setting up the basic system, and then prioritizing what records and what documents would be the most appropriate to continue to bring into the system.
Are we all caught up with all the plans, the old plans, all the engineered plans?
No.
I mean, building plans?
No, like I say, 250 is for the historical planning stuff. So we're tired. I mean, it just depends how far back you want to go. I mean, we could scan. And
So we're currently doing on the going forward basis.
on the departments we're working on, yeah. But
Right.
then again, with the ones like PD, we're just at the infancy stages.
But this would go back for planning and building and catch up the archive.
Right. What we found is worked out real well is working with the GYA. The students are excellent scanners. Man, for the dollars they're getting, I mean, we're going back. What's interesting, you take a department and they start using it. Well, they've only scanned in a couple records. You get the GYA kids months in advance. We did, was it 13,000 for GWP, and all of a sudden their database is there. They can start using it.
To be clear, council did actually previously approve funding for the building documents. So the majority of the key building documents have already been scanned into the system. It's a proposal that it's a plan that Public Works has been underway for some time.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, we've put in about 250,000 sheets of plans and about 1 million pieces of or documents from the permit packets. Mm-hmm. And we've established a very sophisticated filing system in the basement of the MSB, and so we've actually used microfiche for the plans, and then we have the packets all duplicated down there, which has freed up a lot of space in building and safety.
So this more moves now into the planning documents.
Is there any audit of that taking place to go back and see if and let me explain to you why. I built a house on Raymond. It was finalized on year 2000. I pulled permits and everything else. I was in Taiwan, and I got a call from my wife because the previous owner, the house that I sold to those owners, even though I gave them my orange copy of the permit and everything else, they had lost it. They couldn't find it. So they went to the city to see if they could pull the permits on the house, so because they were selling the house. I get a call from my wife, I'm in Taiwan airport, saying the guy can't find the permits. City cannot find the permits. I had to make a call to Stuart Tom, explain to him, because Stuart was the one who worked with me those days. I was not even in city council, and he remembered as I went through the process, which permits I pulled and all the stuff. So he had to literally go in there and try to find it. So it wasn't available electronically. Now, I couldn't find my own records because I had sold the house and I thought it was over. I did find the actual copies as I was purging through my documents, trying to clean up my tax records of things that are old or whatever, and I came across them, so I actually had the hard copies of the stuff. My worry is that we sometimes do the stuff. Do we drop things out? Is there backup systems to this? So, because the staff couldn't find those records. And that's year 2000. We're not talking about 1972.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian.
I thought you got married in 2004 or 2005.
I'm not talking about marriage license. I'm talking about
You're talking about your wife in 2000.
No, I'm talking about the house that I built in 2000.
More recently.
She called me this year. She called me this year, yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Right. That's right.
If you lose your concentration, get off.
You're not listening.
One of the things that we found, Mr. Yusefian, is there's a little bit of growing pains as you do this process, because you have to actually export the documents, have to go off-site to where they are reproduced. So we make a very clear record of everything that goes out to the consultant or the contractor, and when it comes back, it's double-checked against that. What we have found, and I'm not sure it's in your situation, but it sounds very, very much like other ones we've had, is that happens to be a packet that's out. It's out with the consultant. Having the consultant go through and track it down can sometimes take a lot of time, but we've had to send staff down to drive down to the consultant's place to pull back a plan to bring it back to the office. One of the growing pains in this process is if you're using off-site reproduction, is that you have to let those go for a short period of time, and we've been very, very, as custodians of those records, we've made very accurate reports to keep for ourselves of what we sent out, and then verify that when it comes back. But it is nonetheless, there is a time frame when it's off-site, and either you have to go get it from them, or if the individual is willing to wait till it comes back. And the process can take, upwards of about 4 to 6 weeks.
The only issue that I had with that is that when the property owner went to the city and the buyer of the new property went to the city, they were told the work was not done. It wasn't done permitted. There has no permits even issued on this thing. We don't know what you're talking about. And so, in my case, I was lucky. Stewart Town was around and I was around, so we knew. But if this had happened maybe 15 years from now and none of us were here, Stewart is retired and I'm gone, what would happen to that type of thing? And so there needs to be maybe another process that says to staff, if you can't find it in database, it may be in a packet that has been sent out. You better go check there, instead of telling people, oh, this was done illegally. There's no such thing.
That wouldn't be appropriate. You're right. They should have been able to go through a checklist and say, it's possible that this could be off-site. Now, hopefully, from this point forward, you won't have that problem, because everything will be instantly put in the electronic
Let's
format
hope
or
so,
microfiche.
but I think you need to think about some type of check and balances for that.
Well taken.
Thank you.
And we do extensive work on backing up once it gets to be electronic. And we've got a big, massive store server from IBM, and then we do off-site storage of the tapes and back into Iron Mountain, and to keep it off-site just in case we happen to fall in a hole or something over here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this one is a very moving target. Cities, I believe 2 years ago, were approached by Earthlinks. We were approached by Earthlink. I talked to the guy on the side. He said he literally had millions, $3 to $5 million to sink into cities like ours. That has drastically changed to where they're looking for the cities to be anchor tenants. What that means is they would like us to pony up most of the money and have most of the risk. So what we've done is put in a range here, looking for direction if we're going to go. We have a report coming back to council in, I think, 30 days, somewhere around there, and give you guys better direction. Right now, this is our best guess of what it would take.
Is this the Wi-Fi?
This is the Wi-Fi, citywide Wi-Fi.
There is a whole lot of literature out there now on how this industry has changed, and I liken it to where the television cable industry was 25 years ago, and they were offering all these great deals to cities. You'd make a profit, we'd wire all your facilities for free, and of course over time you found out that very little of that came to pass. This is much the same way. Tremendous optimism about what these companies could make for a Wi-Fi system, and cities thinking we'll be able to get the systems installed, we'll get all our facilities done for free, we'll have all this additional services, and might even make a profit on it. The whole paradigm has changed. Indeed, now these systems aren't as profitable as the vendors thought, and there's actually a cost to cities now in order for Wi-Fi. So, and that's just happened in the past 2 years or so.
Yeah, even they're starting to split them in half. I was down in Anaheim 2 weeks ago, and Earthlink has a system, and the city of Anaheim is almost doing a parallel system. And talking to the techs in the city, they kind of think of Earthlink as just this other thing that just not as good, not as nice, and they don't know what is going to happen. So it's, again, we're going to have to come back with you. We've got a consultant. He's around the United States. He gets involved in all the cities, so he'll give us better direction on where to go. But that's roughly the price tag between the beginning and the end. Now, we do have hotspots in the library now. A citizen can go into any one of our libraries, get on the internet, and surf to his heart's content. Out here in the quad area, we can do that. We have an internal wireless network inside here. All the police buildings, internal wireless. All the police cars running on a wireless system. So, and just there's a bunch of dead spots in the city with the price that we have. But we're going to have to come back with you and see what direction you want to take.
What if you do just the core of the city?
Yeah.
I mean,
You can.
And we had given you a number,
I mean,
150,000 a square foot. Square mile.
Right.
Square foot.
What was it?
$150,000 per square mile.
Okay.
So you
So if you did 1 square mile, it'd be $150,000 per year?
No, that's installation.
That's the capital cost.
The capital, and then you have the, you're probably going to be replacing that on a 5 to 7 year.
Okay. Are we talking free Wi-Fi?
Free Wi-Fi.
Free to the consumers? Okay.
Although not free
that-
TV gives you access, you
yeah.
have to have a service provider that
to
you still
clarify
would
it.
go through.
To clarify that, that's what has been very helpful with the consultant, of making this real, where we've said free Wi-Fi for everybody. The reality is that there's not much demand for services like that, and in fact, the business demand that we might anticipate for a Wi-Fi system hasn't been materializing in other cities. And in fact, these systems seem to only have real value going on a citywide basis if the city itself has a business need for that type of a system, and so that we would be investing under any circumstance, whether it be for public safety purposes, whether it be for our public utility SCADA systems, the systems that read meters and provide load balancing type of information. So I think what we're going to be able to do in about a month is come back with a very sophisticated view of the current technology, the current use of a Wi-Fi system, so we really can make informed decisions. A free system would be one that would actually, the city would simply have to subsidize. There's no economics for an Earthlink or somebody to put a system out that the citizens can use for free. That's not even in the offerings any longer.
Is there currently any security, for instance, out in the area outside? Is there any security for the users, or that could theoretically be hacked?
They actually go, don't mean to blow anybody out of the water here, into our demilitarized zones. We have a outside firewall, inside firewall, so we do a lot of protection for the users, but then we want to be protected from them. So they jump into the middle, like the library access. We've been doing this for a number of years and very successful with that.
What we've heard, I think early on, our thinking was that there were some tremendous economic development advantages to having Wi-Fi. I think what the consultant told us was actually the businesses are really more interested in the optical wiring.
Right. Yeah, fiber optics.
Yeah, fiber optics as opposed to this. That's because it's got so much more capacity for them.
Please include in the report the obsolescence of this current system, because I'm not a techie, but the way progress has been made in the wireless arena, it's I think, and we're looking, always at a forward window, and we hate to get there and say, oh, well, we shouldn't have done this, maybe we should have waited, and this is the new technology. So if the report, you don't have to answer that now, but please address that in the report so we can mull that over.
That's why being cautious in this area has generally been an advantage. I mean, we were a year and a half ago under one assumption about the nature of this industry and market, and here today, it's entirely different than we thought a year and a half ago.
Well, let me ask you this. If our experts are telling us this is a bad idea, why is Burbank instituting this? Why is other cities instituting this? If this is obsolete, it's worthless, nobody needs it. Why are other cities installing this system?
We're not saying that. You need to listen to the presentation, because it's a different way that you have to evaluate it, if it has value to you. The paradigm shift is, don't expect to be able to do this for free to the city. It isn't going to be free.
Well, it wasn't free to Burbank either. I mean, they're paying to install these units.
Early
we
on
will be
through-
paying to install some of these things, too.
Right.
And
Early on through Earthlink, though, they were proposing to give it totally turnkey, free. You just, through your utilities, all your rights of way, that was your portion of it.
And what we're saying is that doesn't exist anymore. So you have to evaluate this based on what is its value to you from a business standpoint as a city and your operations or your business community.
Right, but
And in that
Burbank just
respect,
did it this year. I mean, they just did this several months ago.
And what we'll be presenting is that there will be scenarios where it would in fact be beneficial for us to make the investment. The Burbank and Anaheim model is a commercial model. Both of those cities have always been very aggressive with their utilities of moving just out of electrical services into communication services. So they install infrastructure for communications and then sell those services to providers. That is a model that could work for the city of Glendale that would be explored. The difference of the paradigm that Mr. Starbird is indicating is literally a year and a half ago, Earthlink and a couple major providers had said, we will come in if you allow us to use your infrastructure, your underground ductwork and your overhead lines, and for free, we'll install this system. The city will be able to use it at little to no cost, and will make a very discounted cost to the citizens. That is simply not a paradigm that exists any longer. That's not the Burbank model. They are installing it on a commercial basis. They see it as a commercial opportunity and have always been very aggressive in that way of installing fiber optics and communication systems for commercial purposes and resale.
Okay. All right. What's left?
Just one last project, wireless communication systems.
This is part of a systems operations fund, and we've been more of a deferred maintenance. I think for the last 3 years, police and fire and IS have been trying to get $1.25 million, this 1250, into the wireless communications fund to keep up with all the catch-up replacement, the upgrades to the system. This is very important, and we've got police and fire here. In that, without this, our radios are getting older. I've got mountaintop issues. I've got generators that aren't big enough. I've got air conditioning that's going out. We just lost Culver City here, went offline due to air conditioning problem, overheat, and I feel at this point in time we cannot defer this any longer. We really need to bite the bullet and go for $1.25 million every year and get that into the wireless fund. Like I say, I've got police and fire here. Police is the first one up, taking out some of their radios, displacing them down to the general government. So if we do not do that, general government's going to have to start buying lesser radios. We've got a very detailed plan on how this works.
Mr. McFall.
Again, by way of background, the City Council will recall there was a point in time a number of years ago we found ourselves in a crisis. We had our radio system, the backbone system, and also the radio devices themselves that were in a need to be replaced, and we had not been setting funding aside along the way to replace that system. That was about a $15-16 million single hit. At that time, the City Council directed and staff recommended that we begin to set money aside so that in the future we would have funds available for that, and we have been doing that over the past few years. We have not, though, been able to fully fund that amount. It is a very expensive proposition. So we currently have a set-aside fund that puts money aside for the replacement, the ultimate replacement of the backbone itself, and then also the more frequent replacement of individual units, the radio units, whether they're mobile units or portable units.
How much we put to? How much?
That's actually what I was asking Mr. Ehlers to look at.
And what do you have in the account?
We set aside $1.9 million each year for this.
$1.9 million.
Yeah.
So it's a 1.9 million every year. And so what is the current balance in that account?
That I don't have on hand.
As we closed out last year, we were $50,000 in the red.
Oh, wait a second.
I don't exactly know what that means.
We overran it by $50,000. I've got a...
We're putting $1,900,000 in that account every year to be used when this system, backbone system, is going to be replaced.
It's more than just the backbone. It's the backbone, and it's also
annual maintenance.
As we've become very educated about this, this is not a simple undertaking. There are a number of different levels that money needs to be set aside for. One is just the annual maintenance of the system itself. Another, and so that is an annual expense. That's an expense for the maintenance of the system.
Right. Your radios fall, break, whatever you you need to fix those.
And actually, all the software maintenance that goes
Okay.
along with it, along with that. So that is a significant annual expense. And then you have an expense that is replacement of all the various different transcribers, the radio units themselves. Those have a lifespan of a definable number of years. We use as a lifespan the upper limits. We're not. We
3 to
use
5 years, yeah.
We use that. So that is one number. And then you get all the way to the replacement of the backbone system itself.
Okay.
Becoming more complex now with ISIS, with the Verdugo system,
Right.
and the expansion of the Verdugo
Right.
system. So what staff has done is working with police and fire and with the IT staff and with our consultant has put together all of these different needs for replacement, for set-aside, and evaluated those against what is currently being set aside, the $1.9 million a year, and the gap that we have right now that is $1.25 million.
So we're virtually spending 1.9 just supporting the system.
Just supporting the system. We will start going backwards, if you through all the sheets we have, in that police will have to hold on to their radios. There's no funding source for the police radios. I say this, the problem is, and I had worked on it, we have a $28.679 million system with replacement cycles of going from 7 to, we have one at 40 years, but basically 7 to 10 years.
So a $30 million system in today's dollars.
Today's dollars. I mean, it is what it is. And with ISIS and selling that system, it's more and more important that we do not defer the maintenance on a lot of these mountaintops to where we start losing cities. Like I say, we lost Culver City due to an air conditioning issue.
I'm having a difficult time understanding. We spent $17 million, not 16, $17 million, bought the system. It was $4 million extra to get into ISIS, so-called, because we wanted to have this system that was able to communicate with everybody else, and so we bite the bullet and went out there and spent all that money. We had some warranties from Motorola, and they were supposed to warranty some of our equipment for a certain amount of time, and so on and so forth. Now, we did this only about 3 to 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, because I remember how many times I've been to Washington. Now, 4 years down the road, every year we put $1.9 million for 4 years in this account, and we're $50,000 in the hole.
It's not a replacement account. I mean, that's
And
for ongoing
I'm trying to
maintenance.
understand that. Why does it cost $2 million to maintain a $17 million project?
Well, again, it's really a $28.6 million project. I mean, the money you had put in, we still had infrastructure around it. We had a radio system, we had towers, we had generators. We're still running off of generators on Mount Tom and air conditioning prior to that.
Okay.
But again, in today's dollars, our system is $28.6 million. And again, if you just do the straight math, I mean, you go from 5-year replacement cycle, I get 7, 10.
I understand.
And that's
Okay,
where we're at.
$17 million we spent, you said $28 million, that means there was an $11 million infrastructure that was already in place before we did that.
Roughly, yeah.
In the past, how much did we spend for that $11 million infrastructure? I mean, it was there before, we had to maintain it before.
That was when Mr. Starbird came in, and the first thing he ever saw of me was complaining I needed $10 million for a radio system that was flat, just falling down around us.
So the answer was we weren't. And
We
that was the
weren't.
problem.
I mean,
and so we were letting the system get further and further and further behind.
So we did nothing for that $10 million infrastructure.
We did something, but
there
we
was
didn't do
zero
what we should.
amounts for maintenance.
It was very difficult. Like I say, the budget, I was with police and fire, again, it was a $10 million issue that I kept presenting, and it was an insurmountable issue, and we had to keep deferring it. But we're slowly getting better and better to where the gap is only $1.25 million. I feel great that it's only $1.25 million.
This is a community. We're not in a current crisis. We're trying to avoid it. What this is doing is setting money aside so that in 2010-11, when we need, I'm making up the number, when we need to replace $10 million worth of components, we have the $10 million that's been set aside for it.
But Bob, in all due respect, originally we ended up putting in less money than 1.9. Later on, we increased it to 1.9 because the same exact speech was given. We're not in a crisis. We need to put the money out there so we don't end up. Now I'm being told that they have gone through the 1.9. We are in crisis. We're in red by $50,000. And we have units that are going out. We have air conditioning issues. We have maintenance issues. So I don't know what is considered to be crisis. A total failure of the system is considered to be crisis?
The answer is yes. If you were where we were 6 years ago, you'd be in a crisis, and that was not facing up to what it costs to maintain a $30 million communication system. What Scott is telling you is it costs $2 million a year just to maintain the system, not even to set money aside for eventual replacement of your backbone. So we can maintain it, in which case 10 years from now we'll face the same problem we had 5 years ago, and that is we'll have to then go out and scurry around and try and find $15 or $20 million to replace the system. Or we can recognize, and we don't like this any more than you do, but we have to be realistic about what these $30 million complex communication systems take to adequately maintain.
In my mind, I don't think this should be in the capital improvement budget, number one.
Well, ultimately,
this is maintenance. This should be in general fund. Shouldn't even be in there.
And that's where it would go.
It should be in general fund. This is maintenance. You've gone from almost $1 million into maintenance to $2 million into maintenance.
I agree.
And that's where it should be. What should be in here, in general, in this, is to create an account that you put that money aside, so when you have to replace your handset and your other ISIS problems, that's when you pay for through here, but not the maintenance through here.
There should be an operations fund, and there should be a replacement fund, and the replacement money should go for replacing different levels of hardware. Some of the hardware is every 3 to 5 years, some of the hardware is 10 or 15 years out, and that's going to be the really big stuff.
Right.
But the difficulty we had prior to the replacement was, because these numbers are so big, we weren't facing up to what it cost to replace the infrastructure. We weren't even maintaining it, let alone facing up to the cost of infrastructure. What Scott is saying is if you want to be able to replace it and maintain it, you're about $3.25 million a year. Like it or not.
And I've got Ron here from police. He's the first one up that's going to be affected if we don't come up with the $1.25 million. And there is a trickle-down effect that right behind him, he delays fire, and then after that, what his radios have a 1 to 2 year life cycle and are less reliable, but are well served for general government areas. Now they have radios that are all of a sudden dying, and they have to buy lesser radios. So, Ron.
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, one thing that complicates this issue is the need to migrate ISIS to Project 25 federal guidelines, and that is imminent. And we are in receipt of close to $2 million to do some infrastructure backbone changes in that communication system. But to work on it, we need to look at the replacement and upgrading of our subscriber units. Those are the units that are in the vehicles and the portable radios that the officers carry. And as a lead agency in ISIS, and with the imminent migration to Project 25 guidelines, so we start fitting in with the rest of the region, it becomes a real critical issue for us to begin that replacement right away. So we've got concerns not only on a local level, but more as it applies to that regional system and how we'll be competitive in the future at Project 25.
It was my understanding to be compliant with Project 25 and not have to throw our equipment away, we were buying a new bridge or a switching system. And we were going to do that, so this way we will be compliant to Project 25, and also all our new subscribers will comply to Project 25, and that's why they are not coming in. But they will be coming in because they would know that we're compliant with that. What is happening to that bridge?
Well, we received last year UWASI funding to put in the master site here in Glendale, and that master site has been purchased and is ready for installation. And then the second component of that is to actually get the bridging technology for the individual cities. There are 6 member cities here with their own systems that will bridge their system into the Project 25 master site. And this year we have received a $950,000 commitment from UWASI funding for ISIS specific to accomplish that. And so we hope that here in the very near future we'll begin that installation as well. However, the next step that all the member cities have to worry about is upgrading their subscriber units, the vehicle radios and portables, to work on that system.
Right.
And that's our problem now, is that we bought our radios about 5 years ago. They're really, in terms of replacement, as Scott mentioned, they're due up. But the problem is that the model and technology when we bought those is that they won't be truly compatible on the new Project 25 system. They can be bridged in to work, so it's not a real significant emergency, but you would not be able to get the true interoperability or wide area coverage that we need.
But if you buy the new handset that are Project 25 capability through the bridge system, we'll be able to use that.
That is correct.
So as we replace them, we'll be buying Project 25.
That is correct.
Compliant.
Here on out, we have to buy Project 25 compliant equipment.
Because at the time, I think Mr. Najarian and I went to Washington to get some money for some of these projects. The technology itself was conceptually existed. The hardware basically existed in somebody's mind. It was not actually built.
Correct.
So, and that was several months ago. My question is, has that hardware becoming more of a reality? Because if it's not going to become reality, it's not going to test out, it's not going to work, then we are really in trouble.
It is a reality, and we already possess a master site. And so we are on a certain path to migrate the system to Project 25. And we have to for two important reasons. Number one is to fit in with what the L.A. County is doing in terms of the L.A. RICS project.
Right.
We simply have to be Project 25 to at some point in time be able to be compatible with that grander system. And secondly, in order to compete for grant funding, it's very clear through federal guidelines is we will not be competitive for grant funding
That's
unless
true.
we're Project 25
They made
compliant.
that very clear to us.
Right.
So we actually have the equipments that we could go to the repeating stations and install them.
We do the master site. We have secured, and we have recently secured the $950,000 through UASI funding.
I know we have the money
to do the
Do we
bridge.
have the equipment?
We don't have the equipment in hand yet. But
Have they built
it's
it?
imminent? Yes.
Okay, good.
Motorola has developed the technology
That's
to
what I wanted
accomplish
to
that.
Because at the time they hadn't built it.
We're getting close to quitting time here, and if there's any, this is the last subject, and if there's any final unasked questions.
I mean, if we could have fire up here, they have the same concerns and issues. I mean, this is, like you say, last hopefully is not least, let me tell you.
If it's the same issue.
If it's the same issue,
I think you've made your point. Chief Biggs doesn't need to drive the point home.
Right.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, what I'd like to do is have Yasmin Beers talk for just a minute about some thinking we've given to the next phase of this discussion, which will be, now that you've gone through all the various projects, you probably know more about these projects and the options than you ever wanted to. How we'll begin to process the next study session and those that follow, which will be the prioritization process by the council, and how to begin to work through what you'd like to fund, how much you'd like to fund, and when you'd like to fund it.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Starbird is distributing a couple of spreadsheets. Excuse me. One is the project summary spreadsheet, which will be a one-page report that actually Mr. Allers is distributing, and the second one will be the unfunded request spreadsheet that looks very similar to what you've been working on with a few minor changes that I will go through. As Mr. Starbird indicated, this is a way in which hopefully this will assist you in making some decisions in terms of the priorities and where you would like staff to go in terms of the 10-year CIP and the decisions you'd like to make now that you've heard about all of the unfunded requests that we've had in place. The project summary, which is the one sheet that we distributed, includes all of the unfunded requests that you have seen in the last month or so. And if you look at the different columns with me really quickly, the total estimated project cost for those that say to be determined, those basically have a number of options that go with them, so therefore we didn't put a dollar amount to that. The existing balance is if council has already approved something in the 10-year plan of the CIP. So for Fire Station 29, there is an approval of $1.2 million by way of example. And then the next column is fund grant amount, then total funded, which means total approved as of today, and total unfunded, again, is to be determined by the City Council for some of these if there's options that you need to look at, or if the department has specifically asked for a specific amount, like for the first one would be the fire training regional facility of $500,000. So we just wanted to put all of the unfunded requests on one sheet so you'd be able to look at them all as a summary. The second spreadsheet that you have before you is similar to what you've been working on again for the last couple of weeks, actually more like months. And basically, we've left the 10-year cycle of the CIP blank. We have zero costs associated there. And what we would like to do is have the City Council give us some direction in terms of what your interests are in terms of priorities and where you would like us to go and possibly what years. And we would have this on the screen up here, and we would have the dollar amounts, and we would start plugging it in so that way we could see what the dollars are at the end of a 10-year cycle in terms of some of the priorities you give us. A couple of other columns that I think are of interest is total funded. And the first couple of pages, you won't see a whole lot except for Fire Station 29 on page 2. That's a good example to look at. For the total funded portion, you see $1.2 million. And that matches basically the summary sheet that you were looking at previously. Council has currently approved $1.2 million for the total funded as of today. And the total proposed would be to be determined again because it will depend on a number of options listed below in terms of what council's priorities are and where you would like staff to spend time and hone down some of those numbers. So basically, we try to put this together so that it would lay some groundwork, some foundation outside of the discussions you've had previously to give us some priorities, what council's priorities are, and where you would like staff to spend time and get more dollars, and for the dollars that we do have, start putting those in, and figure out basically, from year 07, 08 on through 16, 17, what are council's priorities and what really is the capacity of the CIP. And we've kept out many of the assumptions that we initially had, like the GRA bonds, et cetera, just to be able to hear what your priorities are and then figure out the funding options.
And I might add, at some point, probably after the first pass, when we see, and I'm anticipating we're going to be way out of whack on any given year. There may be a lot more interest than we're going to have resources for. One of the questions is other sources of resources. That could be other funds. It could be other means of raising funds. I don't think we've ever reflected park library impact fees, for example, on any of these projections. We've tried to really just go back to a blank sheet now that you've had a review of all the projects and just take them project by project and start to talk about what would your desires be and kind of what year funding would you see that need coming together, and then we'll go do some work and try and bring some semblance on the cost figures. One of the pieces we'll need to spend some time on is, depending on your interest and desires, the whole resources side of the equation. We know we have GRA bonds potentially sitting out there. We've noted a number of places where we could turn to different funding sources, possibly. And as we start to narrow down the vision for these projects, then we can begin to look for ways to turn to other sources of funds, possibly shift some funding from one project to another to meet the needs. But we felt we needed to first do this first pass-through, looking at just what are your interests. Is there interest in pursuing, just take an example, if there's interest in pursuing a dog park at the somewhere less than Ritz-Carlton but more than basic dirt lot approach, tell us that, and then let's plug a number in and start to work through the projects. If there's no interest in a dog park, then we can take that one off the schedule and move on to the next project.
Mr. Yusefian.
Mr. Mayor, I think one thing that will be very helpful, there are certain things in capital improvement budget every year that we have no way of controlling. There's some money from, let's say, state taxes for the transportation purposes and so on and so forth. So it would be helpful, as we went through the reserves at one point, we went through and we looked at see each year how much money is available outside of those mandatory monies that have to be spent. So I could look at, let's say, 07, 08, I have, let's say, $1 million. On 08, 09, I have another two. So I know these are the amounts of money that is available outside of the things that I cannot touch because they're controlled by either state government, federal government, or whatever. Then I will look at the other options will be is if you're going to add on things like impact fees, if you're going to add on, let's say, redevelopment money, but that will be on the outside. But at least I know if I go to 08, 09, I have, $2 million, so I can plug in maybe 500,000 here and whatever. I have no clue right now. This is like a blank page. What if I say, I want them all?
You just can't put
we kicked that around. The question is, where do you start? We could come back and talk about resources first, but...
Well, I think this is very helpful.
Well, although this is still not the whole picture.
I know.
This is not really the whole picture. So, for example, if you take any one of these projects...
So all the greens.
Let's just take the ARC as an example. If there was a desire to move forward with the upgrades of the ARC development, the Central Park development, well, there could be a potential you could use GRA funds for that. And then we look at the timing of the bonds for the redevelopment agency. There could be a project that wouldn't be GRA funding eligible, but frankly, you might want to do it anyway, which means repay the loan, even though there's implications further out of doing that. Or we could possibly shift money from one project that is GRA eligible but being paid out of general fund money, shift it over to GRA and use the general fund money for funding the project that isn't eligible. So our thinking was, rather than start with resources and try to fit things into a defined resources, because frankly the resources are as variable as the cost of the projects. We thought it might be good, without being constrained by saying you only have $2 million to spend in 08, 09. We thought it might be a good exercise to first go through not being constrained by just having $2 million in 08, 09 and find out where your priorities lie on projects. Now, that's not to say that you'd feel totally unconstrained. Obviously, you can't do all of this in 1 year. But what would you like to do if you had your druthers? Where's the majority of the council sit relative to the importance of some of these projects? And then we can go do a lot of work and then come back and talk about the resource issue. Obviously, you could do it the other way around. Our thinking was it would be a more beneficial exercise to not be as constrained by any dollar limitation in a given year, but to first find out what the council would really like to do and I won't say if you weren't constrained, but if you don't have this dollar figure looming over your head, that frankly, I would argue a dollar figure in any given year will depend on where you go to get the money, what you'd like to do relative to your other reserves and other funds.
All right, so
that was our thinking.
We're going window shopping without any money in our pocket.
Well, you've got some money in your pockets. We're not sure exactly how much, but we'd like to see first what your appetite is and what you'd like to try buying, and then we can go figure out a way to try and patch the resources together.
It's going to be a hell of a couple more meetings, I tell you. I think
and that's my issue is,
difficulties that we're going to face.
Because what I would do is I would say they're all important projects. So I could turn around and say, I want them all. But if you add it all together, you're going to end up over $100 million. And in that 10 years, you don't even have $100 million. Even if you issue the bonds, even if you raid all the reserves, you don't have $100 million.
Let me just maybe in defense of staff a little bit. Here's what we didn't want to run into, and that is us putting a number in a particular year, and then a council member saying, well, wait a minute, you obviously haven't included this, or you haven't thought about that. And that'll happen in any number that we give you. I think the issue of the resources will be probably a rather time-consuming discussion among all of you and all of us. Just an example, to what extent will you reach into reserves or fund balances of other funds to draw into this? The whole discussion of the use of the GRA money and its implications. I mean, we keep revising our long-term projections and what that bond issue could be. It's up to about $48 million now based on current projections of tax increment over about a 3-year period. That's a lot of money. It has a lot of implications on whether you spend that on projects that are GRA eligible or whether you repay the loan. But if a project is important enough, you can repay the loan even though it'll limit your ability to garner future tax increment after the project area is terminated. So our thinking was maybe it's best to try and hone in on the priorities and the cost side first. If you'd rather approach it the other way, and we can try and put together the listing of resources again, and we can chew on those first, then, there's no magic answer to all of this.
Let me ask a question.
All right, let's try and wrap this up.
Those numbers out there on the so the 1 million, 3 million, 3 million, 3 million, 3 million, 3 million, 3 million, these are guaranteed money, right?
Well,
so we know they're going to be there.
As guaranteed as anything can be.
It's called to be programmed and contingencies. That means these monies have not been programmed for anything.
Correct.
Okay. The blue, which is revenues, these are additional revenues?
These are revenues that have not yet been allocated to a project, and I'll point out the 3 large blue areas, which are the GRA bonds.
Right.
But the rest of them are anticipation of growth in sales revenue and so on
sales
and so
tax and Shoal Canyon fees, so forth.
Okay.
Correct.
What, if I can, what you don't have in this table, which will be an important part of the conversation, is some of the items we've noted here as potential funding sources. Let's take CDBG. None of these numbers include shifting a project over to CDBG. None of these numbers include the possibility that maybe GRA could fund a project, or not GRA, but GWP could fund a particular project on this list. So these are really just more of the pure general capital improvement resources, with the exception of the big blue bars, which is the infusion of GRA bond money. But these numbers could go up if we, for example, decide, well, a project could possibly be partially funded by CDBG. Well, there's some more money. Or you conclude, you know what, this interest in doing this project, that could be eligible for funding from GWP.
Okay, we can be reminded of that framework when we begin.
And again, one of the detailed tables you had earlier tried to note the potential funding sources, trying to get a little bit outside the box and think of other funds that could be tapped for resources for the list of projects here. So you've got that in some of your material.
So how do you see next week?
Well, next week,
what do you want us to do? You want us to go and fill this?
Starting back on page 1 and keeping these numbers in mind generally, I think is what you're saying, Mr. Yosefian.
Right.
Then starting to have a conversation about what is the biggest and most complex project here, which is the whole Montrose Library, Fire Station 29, Rockhaven discussion, and what you would expect to see happening there.
Okay, and when are we going to talk about what is that project, Mountain Oaks? When are we going to talk about?
You can talk about it anytime you want to. Again,
because we did get from the city attorney recently a thing. I wanted to discuss this on open session so the public also knows what are different options available to us, because that is one of those issues in here.
Yes, you'll want to make sure that, a lot of the information in the memo given you was attorney-client privilege and would be the sort of stuff you'd want to talk about in closed session. But the broad issue about some of the zoning constraints in the property, that's probably okay for public consumption. But again, you can take up these projects in any order you want to.
Mountain Oaks is under
We
parks.
have Mountain Oaks under the open space parks category.
It's on page 9.
This is just a repeat of the list you've already gotten, just without all the numbers plugged in.
All right. Okay.
We adjourn.
Thanks again for your time.
We're adjourned.
Again, closed session at 1 o'clock, a fairly lengthy item for discussion.